Good afternoon or good evening if you're on the East Coast. I am SheLovesThee, and today we are going to have a discussion about how immigrants that came over to America are able to fare better in the educational system, in generating wealth for their children. And we're going to examine that today. This discussion, I'm going to basically share with you some of the evidence that I was able to obtain. And then, based off of what I gathered and the evidence that I obtained, I'm going to basically share some reasoning for why I think that the current system is not working for Black Americans. We're going to be discussing wealth and the mean amount of income that Black Americans make. And also, we're going to look at a Harvard study by Opportunity Insights. And basically, what they did is they correlated the ability for Black Americans to be able to have upward mobility. They didn't just do Black Americans, they did Hispanics, Asians, immigrants, and most importantly, they broke down Black men versus white men. And I think it's important for us to look at this information because the most important factor is that the government, they already know this. The political science, whether it's the people that are going and doing these studies or your professors, they already know this as well. So if they already know the results of this study, it makes you question then what are their intentions and why they're not doing more to mitigate the information that they received. If you would please go ahead and like and share the live. And I'm going to talk for maybe about 15 or 20 minutes, and then I'm going to drop the link so that we can have a discussion. So this is the particular study that we're going to be looking at. It was done by some Harvard University students or professors. They did basically a study on intergenerational perspective. Listen, it's getting ready to get deep here, but I'm going to try as much as possible to break it down so that everybody can understand what these graphs mean. And then I'm going to let you guys know, okay, so now that I'm showing you this information, what does that have to do with immigration, and what does that have to do with Black America? So as you can see, this is the median household income by race and ethnicity, and it's for 2016. This is pre-COVID. So I'm pretty sure if they did a study today after COVID happened, those numbers would probably be less, just because COVID disproportionately affect African American household or Black Americans. It disproportionately affected them. So as you can see, Black median household income is $38,600. White households is $63,200. Asian, which is very interesting, is $80,700. $700. Hello, Hebrew Child. Hey, Mr. Carey. Hey, Mr. Ragsdale. Joe Owens. Thank you all for tuning in. So right now we're just discussing I'm just laying out my platform as far as where we're starting at. So we're just going to look at the median income by race and ethnicity. Mind you, Hispanics and Asians didn't start coming into America until a certain timeline. Anybody can drop the time where immigrants started coming into America in a mass. It was like a mass wave of immigrants that came in. Nevertheless, as you can see, Black American households are the lowest median household income out of all. Does that mean that all Black Americans are broke or are poor? No, that's not what that means. But what it does mean is that for Black American households overall, that's the median income. We're even, and you can also see American Indians are not about $1,000 difference between Black Americans and American Indians. And that's very interesting. So American Indians were disenfranchised, had their land stolen. Some of those original Black Americans, of course, were Indian, but they had to be labeled as African or of African descent. That was like a certain timeline that happened. But you notice that even though they gave them land and they gave them all of these opportunities before taking a lot of them back, American Indians don't fare that much better than Black Americans. So that's very interesting to note. So this is how we talk about upward social mobility. And basically what that is saying is that if I make a certain amount of money, what is the likelihood that my children are going to make more or the same amount? And so if you look at the red line and the purple line, that's for Black Americans and American Indians. So if you, for example, this is how you read this graph. If the parent's household income at the bottom, you see the number 60. So if you look at 60, you'll see that Black Americans have, for the mean child household income is less than 60. So even if you as a parent, even if you make in the 60 percentile rank for income, your child is still going to make less than you. So basically what's that showing is that if a person is born into a certain class, a certain median of income, more than likely they're not going to leave that. You're not going to see a jump where you start and you're making 20,000 or 30,000 a year and thinking that your child is going to make 120 and 150,000 a year. For the most part, the income that you're born into is the income that you'll stay in. And this is not something that I made up. This is factual. The government knows this, and education system knows it. So now you have to question, so if they know this, why aren't they doing more to mitigate for Black Americans and American Indians? Why aren't they mitigating that? This is another example of college attendance rates versus parent income rate. So if your parent has low income, you have a lower level chance of going to college. Whereas if you have higher income, you'll see that more than likely, even though Black males are lower. So even if your mom is in the 100th percentile for income rate, your mom and your dad, you still only have an 80% chance of going to college. Lower than any other ethnicity. Black females have the basically right about higher levels than white males, except towards the end. So a Black female is more likely, Black and white females are more likely to go to college, even if they have low income by their parents. They're more than likely to go. So this basically is in line with the theme that Black women go to college more than Black men. This basically proves that theory right there. So even if a Black woman has parents who were not well off, they have lower income, they're still more likely to go to college than a white or Black male in those same types of circumstances. And then the white females and the Black females, they're pretty much in line with each other. And I know this is a lot of like graphs and stuff. I know there's a lot of graphs, but after we work through the graphs, then I'm going to get into the details. So it's just important to see the data, and then we'll put some framework on what the data means. So as we know, high poverty rates is directly related to incarceration rates, especially for Black males. But it's noticeable that white male children who are in the same circumstances as Black male children are less likely to be incarcerated. This is from ages 27 to 32. So they already know, based on the data, that if you are a Black male and you grow up in an impoverished community, you are almost 5, 10, 15 times more likely to go to prison than a white male. And they know this. Incarceration rates for white females and Black females, they're virtually, it's a very slight deviation for Black women. But for the most part, they have low incarceration rates for both Black and white women. So this is what the Harvard study came out. It basically said difference in incarceration rates are substantial, but it's unlikely to mechanically explain entirety of Black-white income gap for males. Income gap remains substantial even among children in the highest income families. So even if you have the most money, you still don't have the same amount of money as a white household. It says incarcerated individuals have low earnings even prior to incarceration. And we treat incarceration as an outcome determined by the same processes that shape labor market outcomes. Black-white gaps in earnings conditional on parental income are large for men, but small for women. So out of those graphs that we just looked at, white women and Black women were basically right on line with each other. But as far as Black men, they had a large gap that we could see. So it says it does not imply that Black women have the same level of welfare as white women. Black women have lower household income conditional on parent income. It also does not mean that incomes of Black women will converge to those of white women across generations. So Black women grow up in lower income households in each generation. It does suggest that addressing the unique challenges faced by Black men may ultimately raise the incomes of both Black men and women. So, based on this study, they already know that addressing unique challenges faced by Black men may raise the income of both Black men and women. So, what do? They don't address those challenges that Black men face. One of those things that Black men face is racial bias. Hey, Doc. Okay, and this is my last slide about upward mobility. And then we're going to get into the immigrants and how they took the opportunities created to remedy slavery, how they took those and utilized those to their advantage. And also, we'll talk about how there are a lot of different programs for refugees and immigrants that pay millions and millions of dollars to nonprofit organizations, educational organizations, state and local governments. They have millions and millions of dollars in funding for refugees and immigrants. Whereas basically the types of programs that they have specifically for impoverished Black Americans is almost null and void. So this is an average individual income for males with parents earning $25,000. So if your parents earn $25,000, this is the likelihood that you'll have some form of upward mobility. So if you see in the red, basically that means that you'll dip down. So as you can see, which it's pretty much along the lines of slavery. If you see like in the South, it'll be negative earnings in the South. And that's why you see a lot of folks that go to college or they go to a lot of HBCUs, or even in the state of Mississippi, they usually don't stay. They have to leave because that's where upward mobility is. It's not in the South. And that's partially due to racial animus and racial bias. So this is Two Americas, the geography of upward mobility by race. So as you can see, Black men, upward mobility is red, which means less upward mobility. Whereas the green means more upward mobility for white men. Just look at the difference. In Boston, it says 24K. Thank you. Thank you, Albie, for the donation. I'm going to stop and read this. Salute and continue, bless, focus, insight, and efforts regarding your most important exposure of the many systems that are perpetuated against Black Americans, ADOS via government policy from the 1970s through today. ADOS co-creator, attorney A. Moore, been exposing this. And I'll have to go into more like research for that. But if you see like in Boston, if a Black man moves to Boston, he's going to still make $7,000 less than a white man. In Newark, it's $12,000. In San Francisco, where they make $31,000, that's from a white man going from parents earning $25,000. They'll make about $31K versus San Francisco, $19K. Terrible. And even in San Francisco, $31K is still poverty. You can't live in California off of $31K. Racial bias is key. Then couple that with we don't have companies nor friends who own or have heavy influence in hiring and firing that we can go to and say, hey, give my child a job that we have to. Which that's how a lot of white kids, that's how they get their job. They mom and dad know that everything when they say, oh, it's based off merit. It's based off merit. Absolutely nothing in their lives is based off merit. It's based off of who you know, not what you know. They will get a job that they are not qualified for. So the variation in the black and white earning gaps across tracts. Black boys have lower earnings than white boys in 99% of census tracts in America, controlling for parent income. So that means when the parent income, they controlled it at $25K and they looked at black boys and white boys, they had 99% less, or excuse me, they had lower earnings in 99% of the census. Thank you, Albie. Thank you. Both black and white boys have better outcomes in good, low poverty, higher rent neighborhoods, but the black-white gap is bigger in such areas. Within low poverty areas, there are two factors associated with better outcomes for black boys and smaller gaps. So it says within low poverty areas. So that means suburban areas. Greater father present and less racial bias. So the racial bias is key because you'll see that even though a young black boy could be going to be in an affluent neighborhood, he can still be targeted, or basically they'll say, oh, he's a predator before they even know anything about him. Neighborhoods have causal childhood exposure effects. Black boys who move to good areas at younger age do better. So the environment that you grow up in directly affects your ability to be successful in life. Now, mind you, the government knows this. Do you see governments investing in social programs, after school programs? Do you see these governments investing in our neighborhoods? No. You want to know why? Because they are a link to what we call the new slavery, which is the pipeline to prison. A pipeline to prison is a guaranteed way. So if you know out the bat that black boys have less likelihood of being successful, being born in an impoverished state, and you're not doing anything to mitigate that, you're actually kind of responsible in a way, because you are basically creating that environment. And people are always saying, oh, you need fatherhood president. Like, it's more than just about fathers. It's more than just about like mentorship. The main lesson: childhood environment is an important driver of black-white gap, but the environmental factors that matter differ by race. Neighborhood effects cannot be reduced to a common set of factors that affect black boys and white boys. Black boys do well in neighborhoods with good resources and good race-specific factors. So that means that if you're in a place that's a good neighborhood, but it's racist in there, you can also have a negative effect on your child. If he has to grow up in a racist neighborhood, or he has to go to a racist school, that can directly affect him. The problem is that there are essentially no such neighborhoods in America. So there's no neighborhoods in America that have good resources and less racial bias. If your child is in a good neighborhood, 9 times out of 10, he is going to be subject to racial bias. So now let's talk about what the government did with immigrants. So my theory is that Black people went through the civil rights movement and gaining all these rights. The government didn't like it. They want people to be docile. They want them to work for basically free. So what better way to expose, to get people in here than opening up the ability for migration on a level that we've never seen before. Like, let's just open up the floodgates. Everybody can come here that is related to somebody. Hey Doc, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm liking this series. I'm liking the series that you're doing. Um, uh, I know
Thank
we was
you. Thank you.
I know you was continuing from last weekend. Last week when you was in Gettysburg.
Right.
Um, and you was talking. You said y'all had the presentation with Tavis Smiley
Right.
and the other. I think the other person who was in favor of the private schools, private and charter schools, or something like that.
Right.
Right. I
Well, I'm
mean,
sure he is in favor of it after I looked and found out that folks get money to open up charter schools. They get
hmm
money. But it's interesting, they get more money actually to cater to
a certain demographic.
immigrants.
Yeah, a certain demographic, and because I
You
know
will
we was
get
talking.
a boatload of money. Like, you'll get money for charter schools, but when you tap into the immigrants,
hmm
you're talking about millions and millions of dollars set aside specifically for immigrants. And we're not talking about just college, we're talking about K, pre K, kindergarten on up. There are millions of dollars that are set aside. Whereas it's refugee specific, they don't
hmm
do specific money for Black Americans and say this money is specifically set aside for Black Americans. They don't do
Right.
that. But if it's a refugee, they'll say refugees from X, Y, and Z. Refugees from X, Y, and Z. But if it's Black Americans, they don't do that. Instead of, they'll say this is a grant for an urban community. So that's how they'll do that. But by doing that, you're taking away from the fact that Black Americans are the ones that need it the most.
Right. I mean, and it's something that can not can, but Zoe always say black people devalue black. You know what I'm saying? Black people, and
Well, I don't think it's that they devalue. It's kind of like, are we going to get our best at this place? Like, are we going to get our best at this Black school? Are we going to be able to tap into the same resources as these white schools? So I think that's kind of what it is. I understand what he was saying about devaluing, but a
right,
lot of times it's directly tied into the thought process that I need what the white people have because I know the white people are not going to let their folks just have anything.
right,
So you're a historian, so you can possibly help me with this immigration timeline because I think that once we take a look at the immigration timeline
hmm
and we look at certain factors such as the rise in bilingual, the outsourcing of jobs, the fall and rise of Detroit, we'll be able to framework how the government purposefully bankrupt Black America.
right. I mean, and not just even just Black America. You can kind of say they almost bankrupt America as a whole, because and I understand because they target a certain demographic. It basically our demographic is the main one that gets targeted all the time. If you think about it, like Detroit and the automobile industry, Detroit is pretty much what 60 like 60% black.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at one point in time, if you really think about it, Detroit was like the blackest city
Right.
for a while, and then it turned around into Washington D.C.
Mm-hmm.
which they were, they dubbed themselves Chocolate City. um,
Right. So here, I'm not going to go too far into over 200 years, but we're just setting the context for basically saying it's not beneath the government to do things like this. It's not
right.
beneath a government that was founded on these types of principles. It's not unlike them to do that. So let's go to 1820. The Compromise of 1820. Maine is a free state, Missouri is a slave state, and
The Missouri,
prohibits slavery in territories north of Missouri.
the Missouri Compromise. You used to know that because don't they teach out? They teach out Missouri because you're from Columbia, right?
Yep, that's where
They
I'm
teach
from.
out
And when I
history. They teach out history of Missouri
my
in high school.
grandma is turning 97 on August 11th, and when I tell you she has all the stories, them taking her house and placing a highway through it, not
Mm,
giving her the correct amount of land. There's just so much stuff. Her being a what they call the workers that could only clean and be maids and stuff like that. It's just
Domestics.
all of that, and just to think she's 97 years old and she has a lot of that history. Them lynching somebody, it's terrible. Um, I'm gonna skip over like Native American and all that, and the Irish.
Right.
We're gonna skip over all of those. So the Compromise of 1850 includes the Fugitive Slave Act. Now,
Mm-hmm.
mind you, this is legislation put into law, a law designed to assist in the recovery of runaway slaves by increasing federal officers and denying fugitive slaves a right to a jury trial.
And guess what? That's your start of your modern day police.
Right. And this also shows why Black Americans have a it's ingrained in our nervous system and our subconscious mind, and everything in us basically, we out the gate have a distrust for law enforcement and
Mhm.
health officials. That is something that it's ingrained in our DNA. That we
Right.
cannot, you can overcome it, but it's ingrained in your DNA to have a mistrust of police officers and for you to mistrust medical personnel. Hi, Mr.
Right.
Ford.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, good, good.
Good.
How you doing, Mr. Ford?
Hey, how's it going, man?
Man, I'm good.
So we're just now talking about Mr. Ford. We're getting ready to go to, we're working our way up to the big immigration in 1980. That's what we're getting
Mhm.
ready to get to. But right now, we're just laying down the framework for all this legislation that was in America. So it's not unlike America to purposefully make sure that African Americans or Black Americans are not able to survive and get upward mobility.
Oh yeah, yeah,
So then we got the Dred Scott decision, where Blacks are
Uh-huh.
not U.S. citizens. And there was
yeah.
a
That
Missouri Compromise on slavery in the territories that some places are unconstitutional. Ooh, Jesus. The Homestead Act of 1862 allows for any individual, regardless of gender, ethnicity, or country of origin, over the age of 22, 21, or head of household to claim up to 160 acres of free land if they lived on it for 5 years and made the acquired cultural improvements.
now you know that wasn't for us. Now
That was for the
that
Native
wasn't for
Americans.
blacks. Yeah, that was for whites. And the other part of that was they established those land grant colleges in conjunction with that Homestead Act. That's where you
So,
get the Texas A&Ms and these other land grant schools from. That came from because it was two land grant acts.
so can we not, or is it just too late? Let me see how many years that is. Is it too late to do a lawsuit to get our land or the equivalent of 160 acres?
Well, they did attempt. Now, Stanton, who was I'm trying to think. Doc, look this up. I think Stanton was Secretary of War or Secretary of Defense under Abraham Lincoln. And the other guy, William Tecumseh Sherman, who was a general under Ulysses Grant, he said because of what blacks, the big secret is in the Civil War is that when they turned the black soldier loose on the Union side, it took him like 9 months or less to win the war for the Union. So because of that, Stanton and Sherman came up with something called Field Order 15. And what Field Order 15 today is 40 acres and a mule. Now, most historians say that part about the mule is mythical, but it was true about the 40 acres, that they wanted to give the black families in the South the 40 acres. Now, what ended that was the bullet that was put in Abraham Lincoln's head. Once that bullet went into his head, that made Andrew Johnson the president, and he was a Southern racist who said he would never turn over any Southern land to blacks.
Right.
So that was an attempt to give blacks land.
So this is the thing. I want my 160 acres.
Yeah, because that was definitely it was given to immigrants and people coming into the country, but it was not given to blacks.
Right.
Bing, bing, bing. It was given to who? Immigrants?
To immigrants. As long as you were white, as long as you were Caucasian.
Those Polish and Scottish farmers
the
Irish, the Germans.
Those are the people who they'll be like, my family didn't own slaves. We came here, blah, blah,
but
blah,
they benefited.
blah.
But they benefited from slavery.
Y'all forgot about the Homestead Act of 1862, though, huh?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't hear you. My family didn't own slaves. Oh, I'm sorry.
But they all say that. That's a talking point.
But this is when we as people have to go and do our research, research on history. Like, we gotta look at these. We gotta read about our history. It's so, Mr. Ford, I know you're a historian also. It is so nerve-wracking when I hear people, and I hear younger kids say, so how you doing? I ask, how you doing in U.S. history? How you doing in world history? How you doing in government? How you doing in economics? And they'll be like, well, I'm trying to make it and stuff. I don't like reading it. I'm like, well, if you think about this, history is all about reading it and formulating your own opinion because it already happened. So, but you gotta go, you gotta take that time out and read, go back into and read your history and see why we are in the situation that we in right now in year 2023.
Right.
It's July 11th, 2023. And not, the thing my great grandma used to tell me, and I know, Mr. Ford, you heard this too. A way to keep knowledge from a black person is put it in a book.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that's the thing. That's why they're trying to erase the history and rewrite it. When I was doing my research, you wouldn't believe the amount of people that are quoting Martin Luther King, but they're not quoting the other stuff that he said. They're only quoting what he said in the beginning of his journey as a civil rights activist. They're not quoting what he said right before he passed away or right before he was assassinated. They're not going to put that up there because it wouldn't go in line with what they were saying. So in 1868, so around that time, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution endows African Americans with citizenship. A clause in the 14th Amendment excluding Indians not taxed prevents Native American men from receiving the right to vote. So, one thing I want to point out about this 14th Amendment, if you go and look at Vivek Ramsway, whatever his name is, the rhetoric that he talks about, we have to be very careful with people like him, is he's talking about ending birthright citizenship. and overturning some of the logistics of some of these amendments. Very
Well,
dangerous.
now you know why they're talking about ending birthright citizenship. Remember we talked about that the other night? And one of the things you have to understand is that the census is telling you a lie. The fact that the majority of the people in this country are non-white, they don't want you to know that. When you put together Hispanics, Blacks, and Native Americans, we are the majority.
Not
That's
only
why he's
that,
talking about.
if you were born in Northern Africa, like Egypt and stuff like that, when you live in America and you're from that land, they tell you to check mark white.
Yeah, they've been doing that for they do.
So
they do.
that's a whole nother story, but that's why you saw a push in the biracial push that they had recently.
Yeah, they want to be white.
They don't want, first it was one drop rule. Now that the minorities are outweighing white Americans, now they want you to separate yourself, and they're trying to get, okay, you're not black, you're not black, you're not black. Now you'll see that they push for multiple ethnicities or you statusing not as black.
Now, one thing you got to understand historically too now is that the people that you see in Egypt today, those are not the original Egyptians. Those are the invaders, because a lot of them people that's over in Egypt today, they're of Greek ancestry and they're Arabs. The original Egyptians were actually Ethiopians, just like the original Babylonians, they were Ethiopians also. What we now call Egypt at one time was called the Northern Kingdom of Ethiopia. And so when you want to see a true Egyptian, you need to go to Ethiopia. Because Hosnik, I think his name was Hosnik Mubarak, who was the leader there in Egypt for many years. I think he came after Anwar Sadat. He was actually a European. He was a Greek.
Right, and he was part. They toppled him during the Arab Spring.
Yeah,
back in 2011. Back in 2011.
Yeah, he was actually European. His ancestry was Greek. Because, like I said,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. You can go on.
Oh, I was going to say the 15th Amendment of the Constitution provides African American males with the right to vote. But Mr. Ford and Doc, isn't this when they started implementing poll taxes and reading? Like you have to know how to read
the black codes. But the main thing was when they said that the black men could vote, that was the establishment of the KKK in Pulaski, Tennessee.
Yeah,
that was their number one thing, that they would never recognize blacks as citizens, and they damn sure wasn't going to allow them to vote.
Yeah, and you
got it's always like a catch-22 with everything. Like, oh, okay, we'll give you the right to vote.
It's relatively simple. It's two things you got to remember about America. Number one, blacks were brought here to be slaves. We're the only ethnicity that was brought to this country against our will. Now, those European people came here because they wanted to get out of Europe. Okay, some were run out by the inquisitions of the Catholics. The Catholics, after Martin Luther put the what they call the 99 Theses on the archdiocese resident. They killed 100 million Europeans because of that. Okay. Now, the other thing that happened was, especially in Great Britain, there was a period where they especially in Georgia, they cleaned out the prisoners that they had and brought them to the South, especially to the Georgia. We were what was called a debtor colony. That means that the majority of the white people that Oglethorpe and those brought here, they got them people out of prison.
Yeah, okay. Georgia was y'all was a penal colony.
Yeah, we were penal colony. Those people came out of prisons. They came out of prisons. Now, the ones that settled up in Plymouth and all that, they were running away from religious persecution. Because, like I said, after Martin Luther did what he did, the Catholic Church basically killed 100 million Europeans.
Because the Catholic Church was the church It was
Yeah.
not. It was the church at that time. So
It's still,
they,
listen, one of the things that those people in Europe hold against America is the fact that America is dominated by Protestant churches. Europe has always been, the Roman Empire fell, I think it was 476 AD. When the Roman Empire failed, that was the establishment of the Catholic churches. So they went from worshiping the Caesars to worshiping the Catholic Pope. And so when you talk to Europeans, if you ever go to Europe and you talk to them, one of the things they have against America is the fact that America is a Protestant strong boy, especially here in the South. It's all about being Baptist, Methodist, Jehovah's Witness, Lutheran, it's the denominations. Yeah.
Right. Low Catholic in the South.
Well, it's kind of like a catch. It's kind of like a catch-22 on that situation, because when you look at the power of the Catholic Church, if you are a quote-unquote Christian, you are controlled by the Catholic Church.
Right. So I'm just going to touch on this real quick, because once again, we're talking about immigrants and how they were able to get a leg up for Black Americans who were already here. So, of course, we have, and to me, it seems like this. To me, America allows people in when they need labor. When they need labor, hard labor, and they know that they need labor where they're not going to pay the right types of wages, you'll see an influx of immigration going on.
It's always been like that. Just think about this: that influx of labor, the influx of immigrants coming in with the labor coming in. You got to look at it to where we're talking about manifest destiny, moving west.
Another racist doctrine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, listen, when you talk about manifest destiny, Treaty of Tordesillas, was so many of them. Basically, what they did, the Europeans empowered themselves to come over here and take this land from the Native Americans. That's why a lot of historians say that the European occupation of North America was a criminal syndicate. Because when you look at, they signed 400 treaties with those different Native American nations, right? The Iroquois, you can name them, but they never observed none of them. They broke every treaty they had. Okay.
Yep.
They broke all those treaties.
Right here. It's on the screen right now.
Yeah.
The Dawes Act dissolves many Indian reservations in the United States. Unoccupied lands in Oklahoma are made available to white settlers.
Yeah. The Dawes Act basically said that they were going to turn Indians into white people. That's what the Dawes Act was all about.
And so this is what they did for the Native Americans. They really played us. So with the Native Americans that looked like you and me, that we were already here, not including the mixing of course, Black American slaves, but there were some Native Americans here. They looked just like you and me. And they told them, one Native American, they chose them and said, look, y'all, we're going to give you some land. These other folks, they're going to have to basically abandon their identity. So we had to abandon our identity, and that's where we come in as Black Americans.
Well, one of the things, you hitting it right on the head when you talk about economics. But see, here's the thing. We will always be lost as long as we don't talk about them banking families. You cannot adequately study American and European history, and you don't know nothing about who the Rothschilds are, who the Mellons are, who are the DuPonts, who are the Rockefellers, who are the Andrew Carnegies of the world, the Vanderbilt. And see, that's what happens with us. We get so caught up into that political jargon, because you have to understand that the politicians are nothing but puppets of the banking families. Okay? The Rockefellers don't care nothing about you running up talking about you a Democrat or Republican. They control both parties. They always have. Okay? The Rothschilds financed the American Revolution. But they would, like you was somebody was, I think it was you, Doc. You was talking about world and American history. They don't tell you that. They're not going to talk to you about that.
And
But
it's so crazy.
if you want to look at the policy and the decisions that were made and how they shaped and formed America, you got to go back and study them banking families. You got to talk about the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Carnegie. You got to talk about the Rockefellers, because them people, that's who making the decision, because that's who print the money.
The money with no gold behind it.
Yeah.
But
well, the person who took the gold from behind it was Nixon. Prior to Nixon, I mean, before Nixon, they did have gold behind it, but he was the one. But see, what Nixon them did, America's gold became the American military, because even today, when you look at the collateral of America, the collateral is America's military. America can wage war in any part of the world right now. You look at the Arabs, it's all about their oil. You look at the Chinese, it's all about their economy. Okay. You look at the Iranians, it's all about their oil, that Persian Gulf. But America's currency is, quote unquote, America has the best military in the world. That's America's collateral.
And here's the thing about it too, when you was talking about the countries that have majority, most of the oil, and of course the United States has oil too, because we have oil off the shores of the Gulf of Mexico, and also Texas, and everywhere in the United States we got oil underneath. So you was talking about Iran, oil, Iraq, oil, Brazil, oil, Saudi Arabia, hella oil. You're talking about China. They have a big old surplus of oil, but we
and
are
they're manufacturers. They make everything.
They make everything. But we are so dependent as a country on these other countries for their oil. They can tax us the way that they want to tax us, and they where some of the people in our government are so naive, and so I feel like they're just so stupid, where you have the resources here, use your resource, and you can put the price up. You could be down, it could be up, whatever. You name the price, because if you got more, and then let's just say one of those countries, they get depleted, guess who they gonna guess who they got to depend on now? They have to depend on you. They're gonna have to depend on United States to help them, basically try to stay afloat. And then when you was talking about the 15th Amendment, where you said it made gave black men the rights to vote, we still talking about white government that didn't even want to have its own women to vote.
Yeah, they don't get it till 1920.
Right. So they it's all about, I am a man, I'm going to be in power. Nobody else is going to take the power. It doesn't matter if you are my daughter, wife, mother, grandmother, it don't matter. I'm always going to be the one that has the last, get the last laugh, have the last word, and it's all going to come down with me. So
right.
And see, the thing you have to understand about that too, when America was formed for rich white men who owned slaves and property.
Right.
If you had property and slaves, those were the only people who could vote. Okay, the person who came in with the universal manhood suffrage for white men was Andrew Jackson, because he was a poor white. He grew up as a poor white person. Okay, but that you have to, when this country was started, it was actually started for rich white men who owned property and slaves.
So in 1896, the Plessy versus Ferguson, that separate but equal accommodations for African Americans and whites are constitutional. This decision allows for legalized segregation. Once again, we are talking
about a more scientific form of slavery.
Power structure. We're talking about a systematic entities that are enforcing an extension of slavery. Here's the thing. During the 18
about 20 years after, probably about 1885, 1890, you had a generation of blacks who did not fear white people because they had not felt the sting of the lash. And on top of that, blacks at this time were basically starting black colleges all over the South. They were starting schools all over the South. And the white power structure in the South was very upset about that. And so they said, we got to do something to put the fear of slavery back in their hearts. And so, you know what, before Plessy versus Ferguson, especially in the 1880s, we had the coming of this epidemic of lynching. And one of the things they would do is that they would lynch people in front of their families because they were trying to strike fear in their hearts. Okay, they were trying to reinstill the fear of slavery.
Right.
And that was one of the reasons.
All that lynching and stuff, and
yeah. But here, now and you were talking about the middle class. See, during the 1880s and the 1890s, that was a vibrant Black middle class in the South, especially around those cities. That's why you had that race riot in Memphis. That was about the viable middle class in Memphis. That was a race riot here in Atlanta, 1906. One of the richest men in Atlanta was a guy named Herndon. Okay, that was one of the reasons they had that race riot here. You talk about what happened in 1921 at Tulsa. It was all about their flourishing wealth. Okay. And so that's one of the reasons we had all those attacks on those Black cities and Black hamlets and Black villages. You know, the whole thing with Rosewood was big. You have to understand that those people were self-sufficient. They were making money. That's why they were attacked. But to get back to that guy who could have actually gone as a white man, Plessy. Plessy actually was a Black man who looked white. But in New Orleans, they had a very vibrant middle class. Their thing was, we're going to fight this. And just like it was planned for what Rosa Parks did, that whole thing with Plessy versus Ferguson, that was planned. Now, the carrot that's lost is that the money that those people used to fight that case, Plessy versus Ferguson, the Black people used, it came from Booker T. Washington. Yeah, it came from, he financed that.
This is just a first setup for immigrants, and this is going to also set up a case for, I'm going to basically state that America perpetually has decided that utilizing immigrants in place of Blacks is what they've chosen to do over the years. So in 1911, the Dillingham Commission identifies Mexican laborers as the best solution to the Southwest labor shortage. Mexicans are exempt from immigrant head taxes set in 1903 and 1907. So basically, go ahead, Doc. Go ahead.
I'm gonna say that they basically turned the Mexicans into the slaves in the Southwest, and basically in Arizona, New Mexico, California. Basically, it was mainly in California. They was the slaves. They was West Coast slaves. That's what I said.
Yeah, and please keep in mind that California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas was basically taken from Mexico. That's the whole thing with the Alamo. They were trespassing on Mexican land. And what they wanted to do was, it was the idea of John C. Calhoun. He was out of South Carolina. I think he rose to be either Senator Calhoun or Vice President Calhoun. He wanted slavery to go all the way from Georgia to California. And when they looked at it, the Mexicans were in the way. As I said, the Mexicans, their land was California. Their land was New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas. Now, there are a lot of Mexicans today who refuse to get that green card because they know that that land belongs to them.
And you see how they decided, oh, okay, you can come in here now. So now they're not predators. But also it's interesting how they did Asians. So it says in 1907, the United States and Japan form a gentleman's agreement in which Japan ends issuance of passports to laborers and the U.S. agrees not to prohibit Japanese immigration. But in 1913, California's land law rules that aliens ineligible to citizenship were ineligible to own agricultural property. Because as you know, while we're over here fighting separate but equal and dealing with basically Jim Crow, sharecropping, extension of slavery, they have these other immigrants that are coming in here working, and then just as Black Americans start to say, well, hey, this isn't right, they are doing the same thing as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, two things I think we need to keep in mind too now. After the Civil War is over, there was two things that the white power structure in America said. Number one, they had to annihilate the Native Americans. Okay, got to wipe them out. Number two, we're going to build the railroad from New York City to Los Angeles, California. We're going to bring the Chinese in to be the laborers. Now, here's the thing about the Chinese. When they brought the Chinese in, they built the railroads. After the railroads were completed, they either massacred those Chinese or they herded them into them ghettos out on the West Coast that you now call Chinatown. That's why if you go all up and down that West Coast, you're going to always run into a Chinatown. Those are the descendants of the Chinese who were brought here to build the railroads.
Right.
So it says 1922. The Supreme Court rules in Ozawa versus United States that first-generation Japanese are ineligible for citizenship and cannot apply for naturalization.
Yeah, and the Chinese had something called the Chinese Exclusion Act. They went through it first, I think. Yeah, that was a law about them too. Yeah.
Imagine, and then in 1924, imagine President Calvin Coolidge signing a bill granting Native Americans full citizenship. How disrespectful is that? That you
they had been destroyed. It was no problem extending them because by 22 or 24?
1924.
By 24, all those Indian tribes and Indian nations had been destroyed. They had herded them on them reservations. Most of those Indian men suffered from alcoholism. They had them they could extend it to them because they were destroyed.
And you can actually to this day, like, I don't know if you've ever been on a reservation. They have Cherokee, North Carolina.
Yeah, I've been to Cherokee.
Well, they have the casino there.
Yeah.
Outside of the casino, it is literally like in poverty.
Yeah. Well, the biggest misnomer about the Native American history is that the fact that you call them a redskin, and I've told people over and over, please go and visit Hampton. Hampton served as an educational source for the Native American for many years, okay? When you look at the pictures of what they look like I tell people all the time, they look like Scottie Pippen. Does Scottie Pippen look like a redskin to you?
Mm-mm.
Okay, that's what they look like. There's no redskin about. Now, you take people, that was some whites who called themselves Native Americans, and they did that because the government would give them a check.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the lady that
the Lumbee Indians. I see a lot of people and they're saying, "Oh yeah, I'm Lumbee Indian," and it's like,
well, now the thing about black people is that when a black person tells you that he has Native Indian blood in it, that's true. Because you got to remember, look at the Seminole Indians down in Florida. They invited black slaves to their tribe. They would give them an Indian woman. If it was a black man, they gave him a Native American woman. If it was a black woman, they gave her a Native American man. One of the most powerful Seminole leaders was a guy named Osceola. I think, yeah, Osceola. Now, here's the thing. His wife was a black woman. Her name was Morning Dew. They got pictures of her. She was a black woman. One of the reasons we had the Seminole Wars is because the slave catchers came down to Florida to capture her and take her back to the plantation owner, and they were killed. And if all you got to do is research it, look up a guy named General Jessup. He wrote a letter to, he was a general. He wrote a letter to the United States government telling them that y'all talking about the Seminole War, we fighting Negroes.
Mm.
Yeah, and one of the most powerful Seminole leaders was a black guy. I don't know if it was John Simons or something, but he was a black guy. I mean, a regular black man, but he was head of the Seminole Nation. You can research it, Doc. Y'all can look that up.
I'm gonna look it up tonight.
Yeah, this guy was a black guy. Now, eventually, I think he ends up either in Texas or Mexico or somewhere. But at one time, he was one of the top leaders of the Seminole Nation.
So the Immigration Act of 1924 establishes fixed quotas of national origin and eliminates Far East immigration. So once again, America uses immigration to their advantage.
Well, there was a fear at that time. What you said? What year is 19 what?
1924. After they granted Native Americans.
Here's where the fear came in. I think it was at the beginning of the 1900s. The Japanese basically defeated the Russians. And the Americans were so alarmed because here's the thing. They were saying, because when they look at the leadership of Russia, they see white people, okay? Right. And the person who was most alarmed by this was Theodore Roosevelt. And one of the things he did, he invited both of those parties to the White House to try to end that. Because at that time, like they talk about manifest destiny, the white man believed at that time that he could conquer the world. As long as they were white, European, they could conquer the world. And when the Japanese defeated the Russians, you're talking about alarm? There was a lot of alarm. And that's why they started passing them laws against the Japanese and all of that.
Mind you, the Asians are considered the model minority and the model citizen, but we'll go over why that is. So then we have Pearl Harbor. We have President,
1941.
Yes, and then we have President Roosevelt signing Executive Order 8802. Forbidding discrimination in federal hiring, job training programs, and defense industries. The newly created Fair Employment Practices Commission investigates discrimination against Black employees. Once again, this is another, this executive order is also, if you look at Vivek, whatever his last name is, Ramsway or whatever, it wants to undo that as well. He wants to get rid of it.
Yeah, one of the people you have to study if you're going to talk about that is A. Philip Randolph. His work with the Black unions, it's a lot of that unionizing started with the Black sleeping car porters, because if the railroad people found if you were a sleeping car porter and they found out that you had any affiliation with the union, you were automatically fired. Mm-hmm. But when you talk about what Roosevelt was forced to do that, that wasn't just done out of the goodness of his heart. And like I said, you have to go back and study A. Philip Randolph.
Which Roosevelt? We talking about?
This is Franklin. The one in the wheelchair. Okay. The one in the wheelchair. Yeah.
So in 1943, okay, wait, let's talk about this. 1942, Congress allows for importation of agriculture workers from within North, Central, and South America. The Bracero program allows Mexican laborers to work in the U.S.
Yeah, and they were treated very badly. There was a riot in Detroit, 1943. I think they called it the Zoot Suit riot. There was also a riot out in, I'm trying to think, was it LA or San Francisco? And these were Mexican immigrants who were allowed in the country, like you say, to work in those factories. Because once we got into World War II, that was a need for a lot of ammunition, tanks, planes, you name it. And there were a lot of jobs available. So they did bring Mexicans into the country, but they were treated very badly. See, let me just say this. Mm-hmm. When you look at the history of America, Blacks, Native Americans, and Latinos, there's always been a unity between them because the white power structure never discriminates against those groups. They've always mistreated those groups, always done anything they could to oppress them. And when you look at in ancient times, when you look at the Middle East, at one time, these people y'all call Indians and these people y'all call Mexicans and the people we call it black folks and all that, you were one nation in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so now, which once again, we have a lot of stuff going on with the Chinese, the Magnuson Act of 1943, that repeals the Chinese Exclusion Act. So now they're making them eligible for U.S. citizenship.
Right.
And even though they had to deal with like racism, the type of oppression that Black Americans had to deal with versus Asian Americans is different.
Yeah. Well, see, here's the thing. America never really feared China. Okay. Now, here's the thing. When Mao Zedong and those had the Chinese Revolution, I think in 49, the thing that America feared was, first of all, China's manpower in war. And we saw that in the Korean conflict. But the biggest thing they feared was the Chinese also had the atomic bomb.
Mm-hmm.
But it was still what we call an agrarian nation. The majority of the people didn't live in Beijing, didn't live in the Forbidden City and all that. They lived on them little farms. Okay, they lived like in feudal times. But what has happened in probably, I would say during the 80s and 90s, China transformed into a superpower.
I think China transformed into a superpower around the middle part of the 70s into the 80s, and then it became one of the strongest nations in the world in the 90s.
Yeah, yeah. Because initially, the powerhouse, especially during the 80s, was Japan.
Mm-hmm.
It was Japan. But, during the 90s, the stock market crashed in Japan, and that kind of threw them back. And then that brought on the global economy, made China the strong boy because they were manufacturing everything.
Right,
and America,
right. That's where we see that was that time where they were outsourcing a lot of labor.
Yeah,
the NAFTA,
yeah. Well, see, America made a decision during the 70s that they no longer wanted the factories. They wanted to be a society of, listen, they said they wanted to be a society that was based on automation, computers, and robotics.
But also we have to look at what was Black America able to do during that time. So they call us unskilled workers, but during that time, the 70s, the 80s, even up until the 60s, 70s, 80s. So we had the Great Migration. We also had like a lot of Black families were able to obtain middle class and obtain some wealth by working for like Ford and stuff like that, and then unionized. There's a lot of hard working.
Listen, that was 50s, 60s. Okay.
Yeah,
listen, let me tell you this. Always remember about the 80s. The 80s is the decade when crack was dumped in our community.
Right.
And crack helped to destroy crack destroyed human capital. Crack destroyed our communities. Crack killed our babies and killed many of our people. So don't put the 80s in there as a part of the growth of the Black middle class, because that was the era of the crack epidemic. Matter of fact, the 80s, in the mid 80s, that was the first time that the majority of Black children born in America lived under the poverty line. And the direct result of that was the crack epidemic.
But you know what, Mr. Ford, it kind of started, it kind of these though, with the implementation of the father not being in the home. where
Well,
where the government told the mothers that we can give you money, but this man ain't supposed to be. He's not going to be in your house.
What I
yeah,
was looking
yeah,
at, what
yeah.
that was happening was, it was more so of they were getting unemployed and they had to go out and go find work anyway. So they weren't in the
Well,
home
now,
because they had to
now
go.
here's the thing you need to keep in mind. In 1964, there was a meeting at the White House, and basically the meeting was about what we're going to do about these Negroes, because you got King, you got Malcolm, you got these organizations. Black people are rising up. And
And
so
Lyndon
one of the things
Johnson.
they decided, yeah, this was under Lyndon Johnson, they created something called feminism, women's liberation. But in the midst of women's liberation, they were going to do as much as they could to destroy the black family. Okay, in 1964, 80, I think it was 81% of all black women between the ages of 18 and 65 were married. And there was a lady, she was sanctioned by the CIA, and her job was to help destroy the black. What's the lady's name? She started Ms. Magazine. What's her name? Look it up. She started Ms. Mag. She's still living today. She's in her deep 80s.
Gloria Steinem,
Gloria Steinem. That's right. Gloria
and
Steinem was
Dorothy
commissioned.
Pittman Hughes.
No, the one that is Gloria Steinem. Gloria Steinem has admitted she was commissioned by the CIA to help destroy the black family. So what she would do, she would write these books telling black women, you can have children, but you don't need a husband. And so she was commissioned by the CIA to do this. And now the tricking part of it was she would write the book, but she'd have a black woman's name as the author.
A ghostwriter.
Yeah, she was a ghostwriter. And her job was to help destroy the black family. Because when they said, well, how are we going to stop this civil rights movement? Like I said, they created something called feminism. Under feminism, you're producing the so-called, quote unquote, the independent woman, okay? And you're telling the black woman, not the white woman, but you're telling the black woman that you don't need a husband. You can have children, but you don't need a husband. Now, the other thing that she was telling, she told both women, she told them, she said, listen, forget about having children. Make your career the number one thing in your life. And that has come back to bite them. That's one of the reasons they got that zero birth rate in the white community, because a lot of white women now in their 20s, they finish college, and the first thing they'll tell you, I'm never having no children. Most important thing to me is my career.
Right. So I'm gonna just kind of lay over some of these years, because we skipped over the 50s, but so I can get in line with where you guys are. I'm just gonna name out some stuff real quick. So the Supreme Court ruled that alien land laws in California prohibiting ownership of agricultural property violates the Constitution's 14th Amendment. The United States admitted 205,000 refugees to enter within 2 years. So as you can see, they enter people in, and they're able to. So the Japanese was able to then have ownership off of the Constitution's 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was made specifically for Black Americans.
So let me go right there. So you saying in California, because I remember I learned this when I was in California, and I lived in California at the time. So the Japanese and Chinese their majority was San Francisco. It was the west part of the Bay Area. They was on the other side, so that's their territory. Now you go over and you cross over that bridge, and you get into Oakland. If it's before you know this, Oakland is pretty much predominantly black. But Oakland was like at that time was 70, almost 60-70% African American. Also, you have Hispanic, but then you have a good portion of the Asian population. And then you go south, you get into LA, cause those San Francisco, LA, and then you have San Diego, which is basically close, is right
Yeah,
next
you,
to
you got
the
Tijuana in it. Can't you
Tier
almost
one.
see Tijuana?
You can see Tijuana if
Yeah,
from a certain part of San Diego, and
right.
if you think about it, that's where you tie in, like, Simone, we tie in that Great Migration,
Mm-hmm.
where Black families moved to different parts of the United States,
North and out
more
west.
more north and out west, some northeast to the mid Atlantic states in New York, Boston, Philadelphia. You got Chicago, Detroit, Gary, Indiana was you could put Gary, Indiana in it
Yeah,
in that
Youngstown, Ohio.
Okay, so
Youngstown.
I have a message. I'm sorry. Sorry
Hmm.
to interrupt. I have a message. Let me just go ahead and say this. Someone told me we have to slow the timeline down because we missed some key points. So, post World War II, Eisenhower destroyed Black wealth by paving the interstate system.
Yeah, he basically he learned about the interstate system in Germany under
Hmm.
Hitler, and he wanted to bring the same interstate system to America. He was looking at the Autobahn over in Germany, and what he did was they sent the interstate system through all of the major Black neighborhoods, like
Yep.
in
Oh,
Miami, it's called Overtown.
that must be
In
what my grandma.
in Atlanta, it was called Auburn
Mhm.
Avenue.
Sweet
That's what
Everywhere
Auburn
my
was a
Avenue.
grandma.
major, yeah, anywhere it was a major Black neighborhood. He wanted to destroy the neighborhood and put in the interstate system so that if the Negroes got rowdy, he could put the tanks on the interstate and bring them in.
It's
So
just
that's
like
what.
here. It's just like here in Dallas. You got interstate when they built Interstate 45 to be the actual connection between Dallas and Houston. It
Yeah,
45 cuts through South Dallas, so it separated one part of South Dallas that was flourishing and the other part
right,
of South Dallas
right.
that was poor, and then it basically turned it all into poor. It even did the same thing, if you, like I said, like in the West Coast, even in Chicago, 95 94 Interstate 94 going up that way in Chicago, the Dan Ryan Expressway, it literally divided what was affluent and where was, what was
Right. So that's what my
poor.
grandma says. She's 90, she'll be 97. And she always tells the story. I'm gonna record her when I go visit her in August. And she said that she was talking to her aunt, and her aunt said, Gloria, there's gonna be a highway through this here yard. And she just looked at her. She didn't know what she was talking about. But
Mhm.
you are right. They basically took their land. So another thing that they said that we missed was redlining and the denying of the GI Bill to the Black GIs.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All of. I'm sorry. Um, if you go back and listen to Trump, Trump says how he came up with the "Make America Great Again." According to Trump, the last great decade for white people was the 50s. That was one of the
Mm,
reasons he said, let's go back to the 50s and the 40s, because they felt like they've been on the defense, especially after 69. But they feel that the last great decade for white people in America was the 50s.
Mhm.
and then the next thing they said was in the 60s and 70s. So this would be, I'm guessing that's after the Great Migration or during the Great Migration, when the U.S. factories went to China or the suburbs where the buses didn't run under Nixon.
So the
Yeah, yeah,
that yeah, that part, it's way after the Great Migration, because the Great Migration is in the 30s and the 40s. Because after the 40s, really after World War II, after the United States won the war, um, it was still a movement of Black families to other parts of the United States. Like I said, north, to Chicago, out west to LA, San Fran, here Texas, Atlanta, and New York, but it just stopped. Once it stalled out, because everybody, once we all got into our spots, we all got comfortable. We got comfortable. We was living up, what I'm saying, it's not a fabulous life, but we thought, in a sense, we were living the American dream as being a middle class family. And I could tell,
Right.
I could tell people, look, I'm not poor. I never came from a poor family. My family was middle class, and just like Mr. Ford said, all the way up until the mid '80s, where you still had Ronald Reagan running the country and his trickle down economics, which you probably would get into, because I know that'll be one thing you'll probably get into on up next. It pretty much destroyed the economy of the middle class. Their whole thing was to rid America needs to rid itself of the middle class, because the middle class, you can take that away, and guess what? If you ain't above a certain amount, making a certain amount in your household, you fall up under that poverty line. How can you financially move yourself upward back into that middle class?
Right.
Well,
Right. Reagan.
what Reagan and the Bushes were looking at. See, America was one of the few countries in the world that had a middle class. Number two, America was one of the few places in the world where an individual could own land
Mm-hmm.
and could own mineral wealth. Okay. And they sought to cut it out. They wanted America to go back to the European way of either you were rich or you were poor. So when Reagan came in, one of the first things he did, he started tearing down the middle class, not just the black middle class, but the middle class
Everybody,
period. Now, the one
everybody.
who really did the middle class a lot of damage was the Bush son, not the what was the son name?
George W.
W.
And did,
Listen,
and
George W. took a hatchet to them.
he
To be honest
realized
with you, he damaged the white middle class more than he did
then the
anything.
black, yeah, he realized after his presidency a lot of mistakes that he made. And he said this, and this is coming from his mouth. He's like, I felt like I've done so much damage because I was listening to so many other pundits, and I felt that, and because you're the president, everything's gonna fall back on you. It ain't gonna
Right.
go fall on the Secretary of Education, ain't gonna fall on the Secretary Treasury or anything like that. It's gonna fall directly under you. He felt like, he said that he should have taken more control of how to balance the middle class and keep it from going to, what I'm saying, to being poor.
Right. So the next statement is the GI Bill founded the white flight in the 60s. That's why the government fought getting rid of the draft until the civil rights passed, because they didn't want a rush of black officers coming fresh out of college ROTC programs, because college was still cheap. So they used Ali and Vietnam to discourage black people from joining the army. So when the 80s came, black people stopped enlisting in mass. So there were tons of federal jobs and training black people didn't get. Wow.
Mm-hmm. And then with that GI Bill, you think about the GI Bill. If you was in war, if you went to war and you came home, especially during World War II, and you came home and just start listen to some of the stories, like especially listen to people when Katrina happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
In New Orleans, most of the people would say my dad or my grandfather built their house with their own hands and the money that they had with the GI Bill, because that's their economic financial mobility to be in the middle class.
Right.
So just like you kind of take a piece of what you heard like 15, 16 years ago, it just kind of correlated to, like, okay, I see where you're coming from. And now the GI Bill really ain't, it's really pennies on a dollar.
Mm, 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 mm. So on the timeline, we're a little bit behind from where we are. So I'm just going to read off a couple of these. So once again, we're talking about immigration. So Commerce amends 1948 refugee policy to allow for admission of 200,000 more refugees. The Supreme Court rules in Brown versus Topeka Board of Education that separate but equal education facilities are unconstitutional. Now, we talked a little bit about this last time, but I would venture to say that the reasoning for them saying separate but equal and causing us, we didn't want, me personally, I didn't mind it being separate. Just make it equal. Just like right now. I don't mind you making it separate by getting rid of affirmative action because most of schools are segregated anyway, but you have to make it equal. And so we touched on the Rosenwald Schools. We touched on the fact that Black children were getting their education. They were getting literacy and math and learning all of the tools that they would need to become successful. Over 5,300 schools had opened. So because of this particular decision, they closed those schools down. Then we learned last time that they basically took government money, went and bought buildings and paid for private schools to be opened. We learned that next time. So if you're joining in on this live and you didn't have a chance to watch that live with me, Doc, and Mr. Ford, make sure that you go back and look at that because it basically goes over this point right here, which it's crazy that Black Americans are going through all of this, but you still have a lot of immigrants coming in. So go ahead.
And so when you was talking about Brown Board of Education, just think about this. That's called, making schools separate, separate but equal. It was unconstitutional. It took those all the southern states. It took an extra, what did Mr. Ford, about an extra 10 to 15 years before some of those school districts implemented that ruling right there?
They said that there is a school in I think it's in Cleveland, Mississippi, that
they were the last
never
one.
Segregated. Or no, it never desegregated. It was always segregated.
Ones. And that was Cleveland. Guess what? It was Eastside. It was Cleveland Eastside High School. Cleveland Eastside.
Do you know about that school, Mr. Ford? The one that never actually desegregated.
Okay, is that in Cleveland, Mississippi?
Yes. Yes.
That's
Eastside, right?
Yeah.
Mr. Seeley, Mr. McInnes can talk. I think he could talk about that because it took them. I think they were the last ones to be desegregated. Probably almost a few years ago.
They said that it's still segregated.
What, it's still segregated?
Oh, Zoe said he was born there. Eastside High School.
Put Zoe on there.
But from what I understood, it's never got right. They never got it right. They never fixed the issue. But this is for me, Mr. Ford. Now, my premise is that the Brown versus Board of Education, that actually was a segue to basically place our children into poverty again. Now
what Brown versus Board did, it destroyed 72% of our teaching force. Okay, and the other thing, America was being put on the under the microscope by the Russians at the time, because America was telling everybody that it was land of the free, home of the brave, and the Russians was basically playing up the fact that because of another guy you need to look up, Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson had basically went around the world letting everybody know how America was treating its poor and oppressed. And so they basically had to pass that Brown versus Board, but it was not a good thing, especially for Blacks in the South, because it destroyed our teaching force. We lost 72% of our teaching force after Brown versus Board.
I think here in Dallas, it's only 2 black high schools in Dallas. That's true black high schools. That's Lincoln High School, and that's Booker T. Washington for the performing arts.
Right.
They
So-
never desegregated. They're still, you know what I'm saying, they're still considered black.
Oh wow. Zoe, you
What?
said that's your high school that you went to that never
No,
said.
no.
Oh, okay.
No, I was born in Cleveland. My mother moved away when I was like 5 months old, so I was raised in Jackson. But my brother, my sister, like my family is there, so I'm well versed with Eastside High School. Now, that school, yes, it was all black. Remember, they just created Cleveland Central. Ooh, man, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. So basically Cleveland had 2 high schools, and Cleveland, if you ever gone, it's the prototypical. We used to hear people say back in the day, you're on the wrong side of the tracks. You actually had a set of train tracks that actually separated the races.
Wow.
Seriously, so the black stay to the blacks, this is me. All the black people stay all the black people stay on the right side of the tracks, and all the majority of the white people stay on the left side of the track, because coincidentally, when you cross the tracks on the left side, that's where Delta State is. So, and so now, granted, it was segregated, but Cleveland High School, because it used to be Cleveland High School, it was mixed. It was majority white. And when I say majority white, I would probably go along the fence of about maybe 90% to 10%. You see what I'm saying? There were black kids there. But Eastside High was all black, like 1,000% black. But you did have, I'm serious, but you did have black students at Cleveland High School. So what they ended up doing was, now there is no more Eastside High. It's one high school now, and it's called Cleveland Central. But they actually turned Cleveland High School into Cleveland Central.
So the thing about that is, I don't like the premise that they're doing under separate but equal. To me, it's like, you don't have to integrate, just make it equal.
That was the whole thing.
Like, don't make it, we don't want to integrate with you. Just make it equal.
That was the whole thing. Everybody in, black high school, black middle school, black elementary schools in the South, said, like, give us the equal amount of money that you give those white schools. Give us better textbooks. Pay our teachers, pay our teachers the same rate that you would pay a white teacher at these schools.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing that made Jim Crow a sham. Because think about it, Jim Crow, the whole saying was what? Separate but equal, right?
Right.
But it wasn't. And we know that. I mean, even in the year of our Lord 2023, we still don't get equal funding. And that's in every southern state. I mean, we can look at Mississippi alone. Just last year, we've gotten denied to have our own water treatment facility. We can't get dorms built to save our life. And it's by design. Trust me when I tell you, it is by design.
Right.
Also, because they want to stagnate the growth of of Jackson State or Alcorn or Valley. But also, again, when you talk about things being segregated, if we were to get the funding that we're supposed to get, we don't get funding if we're segregated. Yeah, we don't even get the funding and we're integrated. So it's all the same. The end result is the same. We're not gonna give you your fair due. Period. Right. It's not gonna happen.
Mr. McGinnis, how you doing?
Hey, how y'all doing? Can you hear me?
Yes.
So 2 quick things. I definitely want to answer about the Cleveland East Side, but I want to go back. And I don't know if that was somebody that texted you or emailed you about Ali's effect on the GI Bill. No, what happened with the GI Bill was Senator John Rankin, the man, Rankin County. So Senator John Rankin, what Senator John Rankin did was, right before the GI Bill was signed into law, he stonewalled because he did not want the GI Bill to be administered by the federal government. He wanted it to be administered by the state. And so by doing that, it allowed particularly Southern states to deny GI Bill benefits. So we didn't miss out on GI Bill benefits because we stopped enrolling in the military because of that. No, the way in which they were able to counter it were two things: was redlining, and as far as keeping Black people, they would basically say, we don't care that you have a GI Bill, we're not gonna sell you this house in this area. And then secondly, a lot of veterans just got denied because, again, Senator Rankin was able to have the states administer the GI Bill, and when the Southern states particularly were able to administer the GI Bill, they were just able to deny benefits to GI. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that part.
Okay.
Hey, Zoe, that's why you say F. Rankin County.
Exactly.
Yeah. And now, so with Cleveland East Side, yeah, it was the last. Again, what happened with integration, particularly in the South, but in Mississippi, was that Mississippi integrated after the Christmas break. So rather than waiting and starting integration the beginning of the year, they integrated after Christmas break. But what happened was you had a large number of white teachers who just didn't go back to the schools. So what you had were the few Black students who were sent over there. A lot of times they went over there to either empty buildings or half empty buildings. And so you would have a building that was a public school building on a Monday and would get sold to a private entity for $1. And that is how you got the development of many of the private schools in Mississippi and across the South. And so all non-religious, I want to be clear, all non-religious private schools founded between 1954 and 1964 were not only founded in reaction to Brown, but a great deal of them were founded with public monies. Again, you would have a bus that was a public bus on a Monday sold for $1 to a private entity. And so Cleveland Eastside was one of the last schools that in the Delta, you had academies, white academies. And so it was one of those places where a good number of the whites could go to the academies, and there was really no place for a lot of the Cleveland East Side. And so that's how it ended up, quote, never integrating or desegregating. I always have to tell people we need to make a difference between integration and desegregation. Black people wanted to be desegregated. They did not want to be integrated. The problem was the only way to test desegregation was to go and try to integrate, because the goal was we're going to go to these white schools with hopes not to attend those white schools, but to make them fund our schools equally. But what happened, of course, is, as Mr. Ford already alluded to, the ones that did engage in integration, Black principals became assistant principals became teachers, and Black teachers became teachers' aides. So you lost all ability to shape curriculum and teaching methodology. And then when that did happen, they just simply created private schools with public money. And so you had a school like Cleveland Eastside, which was just allowed to stay there. In fact, Clarksdale High, like I lived in Clarksdale, but I went to the county schools. Clarksdale High and Coahoma County High, where I went to school, they had even though they had, quote, integrated, they had separate proms into the late 70s, early 80s. In fact, my high school, because of the racial, when I went to my high school, my county high school as a ninth grader, it was 30% Black, 70% white. When I graduated just 4 years later, it was 70% Black, 30% white. And I kind of had to end up going there because my mother taught in the county, and I had to go to that school because the Black county school, Coahoma Agriculture, at the time didn't have a college prep program. So my mother had me go to Coahoma County High because they had a college prep program, because Coahoma Aggie, which also sits on the campus of Coahoma Community College, Coahoma Aggie at that time didn't have a college prep program. So they were still underfunding Black schools into the late 80s.
And so we're trying to tie all of this to basically how immigrants were able to get a one leg up on Black Americans by basically utilizing these different laws that were passed or funding that was passed, things that were passed to remedy for slavery and the mistreatment of Black Americans, how immigrants then utilize these things to basically utilize it, and they get to the middle class or the upper class. Meanwhile, Black Americans in the impoverished areas still struggle at the bottom.
Right.
So I'm going to quickly go over these, and then we'll have to jump to the 80s. But I'm just getting ready to read to you different areas of time where there was a huge influx of immigrants. So in 1961, mind you, we're relating this to also what's happening in Black America at that time. So just keep that in mind. Cuban refugee program handles influx of immigrants to Miami, with 300,000 immigrants relocated across the U.S. during the next 2 decades. Goodness gracious. Yeah. 1964, the Civil Rights Act ensures voting rights and prohibits housing discrimination. In 1965, the Immigration Act of 1965 abolishes quota systems in favor of quota systems with 20,000 immigrants per country limits. Preference is given to immediate families or immigrants and skilled workers. Cuban and Puerto Rican Freedom Flight air flights begin for Cuban refugees, assisting more than 260,000 people over the next 8 years. In Mexico, or the Mexicans, the Bracero program ends after temporarily employing almost 4.5 million nationals, Mexican nationals. So this is right during the civil rights. So we have all these influx of immigrants.
So the point that needs to be stated is that the 1964 Voting Rights Act is important for 2 reasons. One, it's because it is the first and only time that Black people actually had a part in sculpting their definition of freedom. Until the 1964 Voting Rights Act, Black people had no part in defining their own freedom. That's why the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are useless. They're meaningless. And the way that we know that they're meaningless is because you have so many amendments, and let me put it to you this way. You would not have needed the 1964 Civil Rights Act if the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments weren't useless. The 13th Amendment supposedly gave Black people freedom. So Black people said, let's go vote. The white people, whoa, we said nothing about voting. We just said y'all was free. And they said, well, how can we vote? Well, you had to be a citizen. That's how you got the 14th Amendment, because the 13th Amendment wasn't any good. 14th Amendment, and then we go, okay, we're citizens now. We can vote. Well, he said you can vote just because you were citizens, because not all citizens get to vote. That's why they had to have the 15th Amendment. So the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment are actually are meaningless. And that's really the crime with all these immigration reform, is that you had on paper this fallacy that Black people had these rights, but those things mean absolutely nothing. So you also need to understand then, if the 1964 Civil Rights Act is the first time that Black people actually got to participate in defining their freedom, that means that we've only been free for 60 years. We were not full-fledged citizens until the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which they good. I just wanted to throw that part in there.
Wait, let's go back to Reconstruction. You did have certain rights or certain liberties during the Reconstruction. Now, once they ended Reconstruction with the defeat, it was Rutherford B. Hayes came in as president. Right. But from that time, at the end of the Civil War till he comes in, there were a lot of achievements for Blacks, and there were certain liberties or rights that they did have under Reconstruction.
Right. What we were able to do was sculpt policy, and the biggest achievement of Reconstruction is that Black people created public education in America.
Right, and the Black colleges, and the Black colleges, yeah,
right,
private and state supported.
Right, exactly.
Okay, and then as a point of clarification, Mr. McGinnis, the reader said that Muhammad Ali in Vietnam, like Muhammad Ali's influence convinced a lot of Black Americans to not enlist, thereby shorting themselves of the training of new technologies like personal computing in the 80s. The GI Bill post-Vietnam would have, if administered fairly, allowed Black vets to afford personal computers in the 80s.
So we got two problems with that.
Let's go back to this Ali thing. Okay, first and foremost, let me say this about Ali. First and foremost, the whole thing about Ali was that came from Malcolm. Okay, that came directly from Malcolm. Ali is given a lot of credibility because he's one of the few Black men who took a stand against the government and they didn't assassinate him. Usually when you take that strong of a stand or speak that kind of truth to the United States government, they're going to blow your brains out. And he survived it. So I'm sorry, go ahead on.
Also, the problem with that is, if you go check the numbers, Black participation in the military did not necessarily decrease after Ali's refusal to be. And in fact, there was an uptick in the 70s and the 80s of Black people re-enlisting in the military.
Yeah, because it was an economic mean to being middle class. Basically, the soldiers who fought in the Vietnam War were Blacks, Latinos, Native Americans, and poor whites. Remember, Trump was supposed to go to Vietnam. He came up with 6 shin splints. What's that boy that was, he was vice president to old man Bush. He was from Indiana. What was his name? What was the vice president's name under the first Bush?
Walter Mondale?
He was Jimmy Carter. What's his, what was old man Bush's he couldn't spell potato. Remember they had the joke about him, he couldn't spell potato? Dan Quayle. Dan Quayle was supposed to go to Vietnam. His parents were rich, so they put him in the National Guard.
Oh, okay. Right.
Bush Jr. was Bush, the President Bush, the boy was supposed to go. They put him in the National Guard. So it was based on class. Yeah. If you were Black, if you were Latino, Native American, and poor white, you was going to Vietnam.
Right. So so that's so the numbers actually don't bear out that a lot of Black people stopped enlisting because Ali. Now Ali, it was an inspirational, and it led to fighting for political rights here at home. But that was really never a dip in the number of Black people. The problem with the GI Bill on its face, what Mr. Ford is saying, the problem with the GI Bill is that it was just never fairly administered. That was the problem with the GI Bill. It wasn't. Now, I want to, because I know I'm going to jump ahead, but I need to get into what about the tech. The problem with the tech didn't have anything to do with that. What happened with technology, and this was Bill Gates, it was the same thing that happened with Major League Baseball. America knew that they didn't have enough qualified people for the burgeoning tech industry. And so what America did, they had a choice. They could either increase funding to public education, which means it was going to give that education to Black people, or they could outsource those jobs. And what the American government and Bill Gates decided to do was, rather than push to improve the funding for public education, they simply outsource jobs. And that's why every time you call to get help with your computer or anything tech, you get a non-American person. Didn't have anything to do with Black people not do, because we were in the military. The issue with the tech was that the money was purposely sent outside of America. And now coming back to that, and now it's coming back to bite America in the butt, because rather than fund public education and rather fund companies to hire tech, we outsourced it, and that's how China and Japan ultimately caught up and passed us. Because
India, don't forget India.
Yes, those three countries, and that's why we are standing. It goes back to what our grandparents used to say: white people will hurt themselves to hurt Black people, and now in their attempt to hurt Black people, now China and Japan and India is coming to say, now we're going to take over.
And invite them in the butt.
So then we have, quickly, I'm going to name some more instances where there was a lot of people entering. The Cuban Refugee Act permits more than 400,000 people to enter the United States. That's in 1966. What they say labeled as white Cubans So if you know you have an influx of that many people coming in and they're labeling themselves as white, they're able to get a leg up, of course, in a society that's built on a racial caste system, if you will.
Yeah. See, America took Cuba from the Spanish.
Yep.
And you have to understand, Havana was at that time. Havana was like the Las Vegas of today.
Say that again, because you don't need to. I'm glad I was hoping you was gonna say to talk about how Castro is the reason that Vegas became Vegas.
Yeah. Well, see, here's the thing. The thing about Castro was he basically tricked the so-called white liberals into giving his money. Once he won the war, that's when he told them, I'm communist and I'm siding with the Russians. And the other thing he did was he came to New York, and the first person he met with was Malcolm X. But now, the thing you have to understand about Castro too, Castro even said, and his brothers said it, the one thing he couldn't solve in Cuba was the race problem. Right. Because if you are Cuban white, you are treated better than the Cuban black. The Cuban black is basically made to live out in the hinterland or in the farm country. The Cuban white, he lives in the cities. So it's not perfect down in Cuba, but
I'm not saying it's perfect, but I just wanted to be clear. I'm glad you said it, because what people don't realize was the mob went to Cuba first.
Yeah, Batista was owned by the mob. Exactly. He was on. Listen, anytime it was a world's heavyweight boxing championship, it was fought in Havana.
Yep.
You know, let me tell you who writes extensively about the color line and all that stuff in Havana, Cuba. Read Langston Hughes. He visited down there several times and wrote about it. And they had, you would get these black lawyers down in Cuba. They could not marry into them white Cuban families.
Right.
Because the color line was that thick down there.
You know who got it bad like that too? Brazil. Also,
anywhere the European goes, he's going to institute that color line.
No, but
it's bad in India. They literally have
the worst treated people in India are the people who look like us.
They're actually darker than us. They're darker than us.
That's what I'm saying. But that's the worst treated people there.
And guess what?
I was gonna say too, look at how the Dominican Republic treats Haiti. You share a whole island. Hispaniola is the region. The island is split up between Haiti and the Dominican Republic.
Let me tell you something. When Toussaint Louverture defeated the French, he defeated the British, and he defeated the Spanish. The entire Western European alliance came against him. And one of the things they are still extorting them. America has invaded Haiti 5 times. The last one probably was Bill Clinton when he went in there and kidnapped Aristide. But the whole Western world and the United States has always kept their foot on the neck of the Haitian people, because when Toussaint Louverture defeated the French, he defeated the Spanish and the British. This is what they said. They said, now Cuba is in danger as far as their enslavement. The Dominican is in danger because of their enslavement, and the United States is in danger. They got letters right now, letters between Thomas Jefferson and Napoleon saying, we got to do something about them niggas down there in Haiti.
Yep. And then like what you said.
Is that why they introduced in Haiti? They were responsible for introducing
the Western world blackmail Haiti. They told Haiti, you got to give us $176 million.
To pay back.
That's why they've been poor all the time.
To pay back.
They blackmailed them.
Yeah. And then what you was talking about, they invaded Haiti 5 times.
Yeah, America invaded them 5 times.
Yeah, the reason why they invaded Haiti 5 times was to get rid of the people, the person who was the leader of the Haitian government, and put somebody with U.S. influence that can influence Haiti into an actual democracy. And every time they put somebody in there, they don't come back. And it's always like you said, Jean-Bertrand Aristide was the last person they kidnapped him. They kidnapped him. And
And the other one they don't tell y'all. I don't know why we forgotten. They went in there and killed Maurice Bishop in Grenada. Have y'all forgotten that?
Yep.
Because he was friends with Castro. They went in there and just debowed him, killed him, and took his country.
And this is
go ahead. No.
This is not popular. I want to be clear. This is not popular, and this is not. He was not a good human being. I want to be clear when I say he was not a human being. But America did not kill this person because he wasn't a good human being. America killed Gaddafi because Gaddafi said Africa should belong to the black man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other thing, actually, it was two people they wanted to off. It was Saddam Hussein and it was Gaddafi. And the other thing was, there was a movement by both of those men to remove the United States dollar as the world currency. That's what this BRICS conference is over now. You're right, because what Gaddafi said, he wanted to put an infrastructure in the Horn of Africa. Because people don't know, one of the biggest problems with the African countries right now is clean water. If you want clean water, you got to walk like an average of 8 miles. And that's what he was saying. He was going to put an infrastructure into Africa.
Right.
So I'm gonna come up a little bit more. I'm up to the 1980s with regard to the Refugee Act, the Immigration Reform and Control Act. Mind you, in the 80s, so in the 70s, the heroin started being popular. After what was it? The Vietnam War. They started importing heroin.
Yeah, so when the
government probably saw how heroin was affecting the soldiers, how heroin was, and so then I think that's why one of the reasons why the crack era began is because which it's proven, this is not just hearsay, that the government contributed to pumping crack into.
Oh, they admit that. You know about Freeway Ricky Ross? They got documentaries on that. They took the crack. They took what they did. It was like a triangle. It was California, Nicaragua, and then Iran. They sold the weapons to Iran. They gave the money to. It was the Nicaraguans versus the Sandinistas. They hated the guy that they hated was named Daniel Ortega. They hated his guts, and they was giving money. And then in the return was the crack hit in California. That's why they call that guy Freeway Ricky Ross. He's out right now. He's telling the story. He was pulled aside. Listen, look at this. It's a thing called Snowfall. They telling you the whole story on Snowfall.
Right. So
just watch that.
So while our community as a whole is being plundered and crack is going through here, that would be the 80s. So this is I was born in 87. So that means that like the parents and grandparents of other communities, which would be the other immigrants, they're not affected by the crack era.
It wasn't for them. It was for us, Latinos and Native Americans. That's what it was for.
It will destroy the whole.
The crack era in the 80s destroyed us as a people. It was a part of the white backlash because when Reagan came in, the whole thing was kind of like Trump. It was a white backlash against all the things that happened. And y'all was saying 64 voting rights. 64 was the Civil Rights Act. 65 was the Voting Rights Act. Okay. But anyway, the thing about crack was it destroyed us as a people. Right. But the thing that you have to remember, the get back was in the especially late 90s and to present day, what hit them was the opioid crisis.
Yep.
So as this relates to immigrants and their ability to take advantage of some of these opportunities, you'll see their parents and their children are able to take advantage of affirmative action and go to these schools. take advantage of some of these programs that fund going to STEM. So they're during the 80s and 90s, while Black America is fighting for our lives, not only with housing discrimination, the crack era, all of these different things that we're having to fight, they're over here profiting off of things that were used to remedy slavery.
Well, all you got to remember, these immigrants you're talking about, they're nothing but pawns. They're pawns. The true policy makers are not in D.C. They're in New York on a thing called Wall Street. Those are the people. See, those are the people who print the money. That's who sets the policy. See, Joe Biden is a mouthpiece. He's in the back pocket of Wall Street. He's in the back pocket of the Pentagon. So instead of watching him, watch the people on Wall Street, because those are the true leaders of this country. Because Joe Biden don't print no money. Them people in New York on Wall Street print money.
If this isn't telling, I don't know what is. In 1988, the Civil Liberties Act, and I don't know where our Black leaders was. What are they pawns? What happened?
Yeah, they pick our leaders.
The Civil Liberties Act provides compensation of $20,000 and a presidential apology to all Japanese American survivors of
that was Reagan. Yeah, that was Reagan. I remember that.
Yes.
But I mean, listen.
No, that was
how do you guys get money before us?
Because they feel like that. Well, they had Japanese internment camps in California. I mean, basically it's saying that you weren't a citizen, we'll let you stay. You weren't a citizen though, because at the time, remember, we were fighting Japan in the Second World War. But it was. Yeah,
they put them in. They were called internment camps. Yeah.
But also, that's also the same time when Japan is becoming an economic partner to the U.S.
Yeah, without a doubt. See,
just like Ms. Ford said, just like I said, I always have to remember it's better to be the king, make it than the king. As Japan is now funding backdoor politics, they're able to get that type of policy pushed. When you say where were our leaders, the problems, Sister SheLovesThee, is that we never. One of the things that separates us from all these immigrants that we're discussing is that African Americans never had a powerful country outside of here. All these other immigrants had other countries that could at one point or another develop itself to have the financial resources to impact domestic policy. Mm-hmm. So they had foreign agents who could impact, right? There was no Black in 1988. There was no Black corporation. There was no country that was majority Black outside of the U.S. There was no funding agency that could push through the 1988 Japanese package the way that we needed. So as Japan is becoming the economic partner, they're simply impact in the same way that China is now impacting the laws that we pass.
Mm-hmm. Well, listen, let me say this. During the 80s, Farrakhan told us over and over that if you took all the Black people out of America and put them in their own country, they would be the 8th to the 14th richest nation in the world. At that time, Black people in America in the 80s had more Mercedes-Benz than the people in Russia. They had more money in Black America than they had in all of England. And I think the Black people in America had more money than they did in Australia. See, the Black man's biggest problem is that we're brainwashed. We're like crabs in a bucket. Booker T. Washington told us, almost over 100 years ago, he said, listen, we are a nation within a nation. We must begin to pull together and act as a nation. That's what we refuse to do. We act as individuals. All of them other ethnicities you talking about, they act as a nation. You can't get, let me tell you something, and I know y'all gonna holler when I say this. You can't get 3 Black men to buy a bag of potato chips together here. I'm telling you. So that's one of the things you have to understand is that we're brainwashed. Okay,
right.
We suffer from self-hatred. Like my professor told us when I was at Clark, he said, listen, The difference between the ethnicities and us is that we're crabs in a barrel. And what happens in a crabs in a barrel, when one crab goes up, the other crab does what? Pull him down. That's how we do, and they know that. You ask about our leadership, this is what they do as far as if the book that you want to read, it's called Racial Matters, Professor Kenneth O'Reilly, Anchorage, Alaska University. This is what he told us. He said, during the 20th century, if the government was pushing a Black leader, he had sold out. If they hated him, he had not sold out. He was for the interest of the people. But if he was making too much progress, they were going to assassinate him. Read the book called, Doc, look it up and see if, the book is called Racial Matters. And see, didn't that book come out in the 80s? Because I remember it was a very popular book. It was Professor Kenneth O'Reilly. See if you can see it. What year, when did they publish it? Because it was a very popular book in the 80s. It was called Racial Matters. It was called Racial Matters. The author was a white man by the name of Professor Kenneth O'Reilly. See if you see it. Because he goes all through the 20th. Now, according to him, you know who he says was the greatest Black leader of the 20th century? And it wasn't Martin Luther King or Malcolm X. Guess who he said it was?
Farrakhan?
No, it was Marcus Garvey. He said that Garvey had the most impact and the government saw him as the most dangerous.
Right.
Oh.
Do you see the book yet? Yeah, there it is right there. What year was that book published? Because that was a popular book in the 80s. What year was the book published? When did it come out?
It says 1991 was the reprint.
Yeah.
And when was it originally published? Because I thought it was in the 80s, because everybody was buying that book.
I don't see the original date.
You don't see I thought it was in the 80s. But anyway, if you get a chance, read that book. It's written by a white man by the name of Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly. He was at Anchorage, Alaska University.
And why that's important.
It was published in 1989, January.
I knew it was 80s. I told you. That was a very popular book.
And the reason that's important because when you understand Garvey, it then shifts the understanding of Booker T. Washington.
Yeah. Garvey was basically a disciple of Booker T. Washington.
Yeah. Garvey actually, excuse my language, but Garvey pissed off Du Bois. Because when Garvey came to America, rather than meet with Du Bois, he wanted to meet with Washington. Because he understood, as Mr. Ford said, Washington actually had a plan for a nation building.
For nation building.
What we also need to understand about Du Bois, and I hate saying this because people are not nuanced enough, although Du Bois, and I want to be clear when I say this, Du Bois was the first, quote, Pan-Africanist. He's considered the grandfather of Pan-Africanism. But Du Bois had to go through a journey. He went from being an assimilationist to a Pan-Africanist.
Yeah, because a lot of the stuff he wrote was foolishness until about the 30s. And basically what he did in the 30s, he started copying Garvey.
Once he got to the souls of Black folk, he was kind of righting his ship, but Du Bois had to pull himself a bit out of assimilationism, and he made a journey to become a Pan-Africanist, where Garvey understood that Booker T. Washington had the best plan of nationhood building.
Well, listen, I mean, if you wanna keep it simple, during World War II.
Let me just say something in the thing. Kate Lofton, if you're calling Washington Uncle Tom, that means
you don't know. You haven't read him.
You just haven't read anything.
You don't know him.
You call Washington Uncle Tom, I'm clear that you haven't read anything on Washington. You haven't read anything about Garvey in Washington, and all you've done is listen to people who use that term who've never read Washington. I just need to say that. Go ahead, Ford.
Yeah. Now, Washington was very complex. That was actually a guy here in Georgia, Henry McNeil Turner. He was a political leader. He was in the Georgia legislature, and he was also the bishop of the AME Church. He was before Du Bois in that Pan-African. He basically told black people, y'all got two things y'all need to do: go get a gun and go back to Africa. And that because he said white people would never treat them fairly. But you can look him up. His name was Henry McNeil Turner. He was a AME bishop. Some people say that he was the father of Pan-Africanism. There's another millionaire black man who lived in the late 1700s. His name was Paul Cuffey. If you ever get a chance, look up Paul Cuffey. Cuffey was a shipbuilder. He was a multimillionaire black man, multimillionaire. And his thing was that white people would never treat black people equally. He said there was no such thing as equality in America. And he said that they could use his ships to go back. Doc, pull him up. Pull up Paul Cuffey.
Paul Cuffey.
Paul Cuffey. Cuffey, Cuffie. Paul Cuffey. This guy was a multimillionaire in the 1700s. He was a shipbuilder.
Yeah, he's from so he was a whaler and an abolitionist born free in a multiracial family on Cuttyhunk Island, Massachusetts. Cuffey became a successful merchant and sea captain. His mother, Ruth Moses, was a Wampanoag from Harwich, Cape Cod, and his father, an Ashanti, captured as a child in West Africa and sold into slavery in Newport about 1720. In the mid-1740s, his father was manumitted by his Quaker
That
owner.
means give him freedom. Yeah.
Yeah, John Slocum. His parents married in 1747 in Dartmouth. Let me see.
Does it say anything about you should see something about what he said about blacks going back to Africa.
Okay,
some people say he was the original Pan-African.
Okay,
you talking about Marcus Garvey?
No, this guy was named Paul Cuffey. He lived in the 1700s.
So this is what we talk about: Sierra Leone and also Liberia, the nation of Liberia. It was a group where they said, well, we're gonna send you if you want to be free, you're free, but you got to, you want to go back to Africa, you're gonna go to this particular colony because Liberia was a colony. So that's the reason why you got the name Monrovia is originated from James Monroe.
James Monroe, that's right.
Because he's the one who pretty much kind of like put that in place.
Yeah.
And with Liberia, instead of it being like I forgot how they named their different parts. Like, you know how we have counties and parishes and stuff like that. They did it in a similar for Liberia. And basically, like, Liberia hasn't been successful since it was founded as a actual, as an actual colony.
Right.
Is pretty much not even one of the oldest. It's not even old. It's like one of the youngest colonies, African colonies on the African continent.
Right. So I was saying, Mr. Mona, one of the things we have to understand, the people that run this country, they use those other immigrants as pawns.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to see the real deal, it's them people on Wall Street, the people that print the money, the banking families. That's who make all the decisions. Always remember.
It was the documentary. Mr. McKinney, do you remember Michael Moore? Michael Moore, he made the documentary. I forgot the name of it.
He made several.
Yeah, but it was the one he was talking about that how Wall Street basically was the catalyst for everything in America.
They make all the decisions. Because like I say, they print the money. Listen, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, they were mouthpieces. Listen, always remember this about Trump. I keep telling that people forget this. Trump did not beat Hillary. Hillary won the popular vote. Wall Street, who controlled the Electoral College, made him the president. That's who made him the president. He didn't win no election. He won. Listen. The night that he made his speech, he didn't even have a speech prepared. He didn't even think he was going to win.
Right. Brother Doc, are you talking about Fahrenheit 9/11 or Capitalism: A Love Story?
Fahrenheit 9/11 was basically, that was about the 9/11 terror attacks.
Right. So it's probably
capitalism. Yeah, capitalism.
A love story. Yeah, I always get them here. Those were the two. And also don't forget he did Where to Invade Next, because he talked about and basically this is what Sun Tzu tells us, right? That war is basically an economic engagement.
Right. Always.
And it's crazy. Always. He hasn't made it after that. And he really after he made Capitalism, he really hasn't made any other type of movie like that since. You have not heard Michael Moore's name for like the last 15, 16 years. He has not made another movie like that since. I think it was another one. Yeah, Capitalism: A Love Story. That was in 2000. That was like right up until Obama got into office. Because I remember they had it was a scene where they cut that I think they was in Chicago, and it was he was interviewing a black mother, and when they found out that Obama won the election, you know what I'm saying? That turned everything that turned everything upside down, because in a sense they felt like we would never ever elect a black man to the highest power in the United States.
What part of what scared them is, for the very first time in American history, something happened that had never happened. And for the very first time, the majority of white men had voted together and still didn't get the candidate of their choice. It had never happened when you had greater than 51% of white men to vote for a candidate that lost. And that is what opened their eyes. And that is also what really, coming back to your topic, you guys' topic today, is they realized that they had to increase the push for the model minority, because what helped black people over the hump in the first Obama election was white women, and for one of the very few times in history, Asians and Hispanics also voted with blacks. Because again, I've never called myself a person of color. I've never used the term people of color. That's not something I've ever used. But when the majority of white men voted together and didn't get their candidate choice, we need to do a better job recruiting Asians and Hispanics. That was the moment when all these immigration acts that you've been telling us, that was when they said, we got these immigration acts. Now we need to start saying, okay, how do we get Asians and Hispanics and Cubans? And Cubans were already kind of leaning toward, because Cubans have always kind of leaned
Republican
anyway. But
against their best interest, because they feel like they're white, they vote Republican. But as we can see in Florida, DeSantis has turned it upside down. So my other premise about the immigration is that the government, earlier I spoke a little bit about upward mobility, and then the chances that a young black male has in an impoverished community, or in a community with racial bias, how that negatively affects his outcomes on life. So then I did some digging.
Now, let me tell you this, and this is something we won't do. The easiest way for a black male to have upward mobility is to learn how to make money with his hands. Yep. The other thing that we refuse to do is that we refuse to buy from our own people. Now, one of the reasons they bombed Tulsa, bombed that black neighborhood, the black dollar in Tulsa was turned over 30 times in the black community before it leaves the community. Now, one time, the black community, the dollar would turn over one time in the black community, and then it was out of the community. Now it's down to zero. If we would spend with our own people like all the other ethnicities. And like I said, if we could set it up where these black boys could learn how to be farmers, to work on cars, to build houses, to be plumbers, learn how to make money with their hands, that's upward mobility.
But that's like something that starts at kindergarten. And so that's what I was showing, is that there is an implementation, and it's intentional to fund immigrants, or refugees is what they call them, millions and millions of dollars, even in Georgia. So I looked up this particular school. It's called the Georgia Fugees Academy Charter School.
What's it called? What?
Georgia Fugees Academy Charter School.
Is that in the metro? Is that in Atlanta? Where is it?
Let me see.
What's the date? What's the address?
Let's see what the address is. And I didn't know you guys had state charter schools. It's kind of weird in Georgia. So it's in Shamley Tucker Road.
Yeah, I know what. Yeah, I know.
So
That's a metro.
That like a heavy refugee area?
Yeah. Some good schools out there too. That's DeKalb County. That's northern DeKalb County.
So basically,
that's 285 north, and it's coming to. It's a place up there they call Spaghetti Junction, I think. That's going into Gwinnett.
Advancing educational justice for refugee and immigrant youth. So I was like, where are they getting all this money from? Where do they get all this money from? So then I went to the website for, I guess, basically they have a Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. And they basically have millions and millions and millions of dollars that they pump into nonprofit organizations, non-governmental organizations, specifically for refugees and immigrants. So if you can imagine that they're able to get these types of programs, meanwhile, Black Americans are left to the wayside and we're called, oh, it's welfare, y'all need to get up and work, blah, 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 blah. Like, they literally spend millions of dollars. And I think that this particular PDF that I pulled up basically was stating, like, what type of things do they want to do for refugees? And it talks about how they're moving refugees into the urban areas. So places where Black Americans are, they're moving them in there, and then you'll see them get their community. That's why in Atlanta, you can drive to certain parts of Atlanta and all of the language will be a foreign language, like the whole community. The signs and stuff are all
that's Doraville and some of the that is.
But it's like literally their own community. And one thing that I saw on this thing was assistance provided to urban refugees should pursue a community-based approach that benefits local communities. Refugees are not always the most vulnerable residents of urban areas, and therefore the needs of the urban poor among whom refugees live must be taken into account. So you're not going to address Black Americans and their needs, which for us, we need schools just like the refugee school. We need schools like that for our youth. I'm kind of iffy on the Head Start and the pre-K, that it's actually helping our young children. Because
here's another situation in Atlanta. Now, I can't speak for nobody else, but I can speak for Atlanta. See, the thing that they've been preaching here for the last 30 years is that every church should have a school. And the preachers here in Atlanta are so selfish. What they want to do is make sure that all of them are millionaires. But if they would put down that individualism like that and make sure that every church had a school inside of it, I think we can have that open mobility you talking about. Because you got to understand, some of these churches in Atlanta, every weekend, they making millions of dollars. They making millions of dollars.
And that's oh, go ahead.
Wait, this is this is a sidebar, and Doc, I hate to put you on the spot for this sidebar. Kay Lofton, Doc Holliday has my email address. Because I'm sorry, just unfounded, untrue statements, I just can't take them. So, Lofton, let's do this. You can get my email from Doc Holliday. I guarantee you can't give me any kind of empirical evidence that the machines are rigged. I'm telling you what I did for 10 years. And I'm not talking about my 2 eyes. I'm talking about working in the complete system of voting and vote counting. That is not why the state of Mississippi is not blue. And that's wherever you're getting that from, or whoever's feeding you that, get my email from Doc Holliday. You can email me and we can sit down. And I can, cause that's dangerous. There are 2 things keeping Mississippi from turning blue. Number 1, Black people don't fill out the census. And that's nobody's fault but our own. That's number 1. Black people undercount themselves. We don't fill out, and the reason we don't complete the census is because not enough Black elected officials. How do I know this? Because my wife is a political map maker whose job it is to take census data, pour it into maps, and create voting districts that expand voting probabilities for Black folks. I'm not telling you some conspiracy theory that I've heard. So if you have actual empirical proof, get my email from Doc Holliday. We'll sit down. We'll meet, whatever you need to do via Zoom or whatever, because I just can't take conspiracy theories and things with no real evidence and having Black people think, oh, it's the voting machines. No, the problem with America, with why we don't have more push is that we don't complete the census form. So rather than pushing these crazy theories that have no scientific evidence, how about doing something to get Black people to complete the census form? But again, get my email from Doc, and we can have a real empirical. Then we can come back on Doc and Sister SheLovesThee show and present the empirical evidence, because that's the kind of stuff that drives me bad when people put it out. I'm sorry, I just need to put that out there. And because when y'all get through with that, I want to come back to talking about VoTech and because it connects to what they're really doing with VoTech and college prep, and how they're also undermining VoTech by making us choose between one from the other.
Right. So for us, and we talk about how to get our kids ready for school, because in order for us to have our Black future leaders for HBCUs, we have to have them at K through 5 and on upward. They have to be getting the right things. This next generation, 3rd grade on down, maybe even 4th grade, kindergarten through 4th grade, any children that had to go through COVID is behind, especially our young Black kids. Some of them are behind a couple grades because the world stopped and they put them on these computers, or they had them wearing masks where they're not able to get diction and look at somebody speaking and how to speak. So basically they're behind. And instead of the government increasing funding to mitigate it, tutoring, what may have you, they just went on about business. Life goes on. Mind you, in a lot of different places, public education is already in the trash.
But Timona, the thing about this though, our public education system been failing for decades because majority states implement some sort of standardized testing.
Right.
So we spent back then. So like even when I was in school, we spent, let's say, probably maybe a day or 2 to prepare somebody, to prepare us
to take a test, not to understand it. Right.
Yeah.
But other than that, everybody was like, we were learning everything in, you know what I'm saying, in our class. Like if I'm in a let's just say I'm gonna put it like this: home economics class. They don't even have home economics anymore. They phased that out. Public schools, which I really hate because that phased out a lot of teachers right there. My aunt was one of them. You learn about what you do in home economics, about childcare, about learning how to do this, sew, cook, all this other stuff. They ain't gonna sit out a day or two or an hour or two and say, hey, let's prepare you to take this test. The only time they actually do that is if you are in a reading, math, science, and at one point in time it was social, or it's social studies, because you can't put history, it'd be social studies. That they took an hour or two or a day or two or maybe a week or so to prepare you to take a damn go test to define if you're gonna move to the next grade or not. Back then, you would define the move that you move to the next grade or not if you are proficient in everything that you learn in the classroom, not from an actual test. And a lot of us and states kept implementing, like, no, you got to take a standardized test. You got to pass this test. Like now, then they took it to the point where if you don't pass this standardized test, you ain't moving to the next. You're not moving to the next grade. And if you were a senior in high school, it could be consequential, because that means that you ain't graduate. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to graduate.
Right.
Yeah, it was called the dumbing down of America. It was a part of Reaganomics. Reagan had a guy named Bennett who was supposed to be the educational czar. He came up with a piece of propaganda called A Nation at Risk. And that was the beginning of the attack on public education. See, remember, DeSantis said about a week or two ago, said if he becomes president, first thing he's going to do is get rid of the Department of Education.
Yeah, right. I heard about that.
Yeah.
And
so this didn't just start now.
Fear. That's a part of that white fear, and chipping away and trying to undo not even just Ron DeSantis and Vivek. And the reason why they're so dangerous is because Trump is just repeating and regurgitating whoever's in those back rooms telling him what to say. Vivek and this other guy, they're intentional with what they're saying. So when they say to you, I want to undo the EEOC, I want to get rid of that. I want to get rid of the Department of Education. The Vivek guy wants to get rid of birthright citizenship. They're attacking Black Americans.
Well, what they're doing, they're setting us up for military rule. I mean, whether we want to accept it or not, we are going to what they call martial law. That's the next step. We're going to martial law. They setting us up for military rule, because like I keep telling y'all, the MAGA crowd is going to try Wall Street. And like I said, Doc, what I say, who going to win that? Wall Street.
Wall Street going to win it.
They're going to win that, but they're going to try them now. They're going to try them. But that's what they getting us prepared for martial law.
But I just think as for Black people, we need to be utilizing those same avenues that these white folks are taking advantage of, which is getting government money to fund private schools. Like, there's literally voucher programs that have popped up all over America, and they basically use government funding to get almost like tuition at a private institution. And they're getting ready, the Republicans introduced in the state of North Carolina an expansion so that these vouchers, instead of them just benefiting low income families, they're opening it up so that everybody can get a voucher, because that's what they want.
You got a $2 trillion economy in the Black community. We don't have to beg nobody for nothing.
It's not about begging. It's about using the same.
But you don't have to ask nobody for nothing. Yeah, you got $2 trillion.
Right.
Do
And I
you
think
see? Do you see them Jewish people going out asking the government for some money?
They're not gonna do it.
They not gonna do it. I'm telling you.
I think also
Huh?
a bigger issue, Sister SheLovesThee, is that Black people, we're actually split on charters and vouchers. So you have some Black people who are willing to use charters and vouchers, some who are not. Because those of us who are not, we understand that charters and vouchers have always been used to destroy public schools. Then you have people who say, well, the public schools are already destroyed.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
So what I'm saying though is that if that's something about which you are serious, what you're going to have to first start doing is having a large grassroots campaign around re-educating or convincing people that charters and vouchers can be used. Because I'll be honest with you, I actually was part of a group that stopped the charter school, a Black-owned charter school, from taking over in Midtown. In fact, Midtown Charter School. I was part of a group, and again, I'm not saying I'm not open to the discussion. What I'm saying to you is there are a lot of Black people who don't trust charter schools, and so what I would say is that if that's something about which you feel strongly and say, hey, what you need to do is create some kind of campaign and education piece that's going to convince folk like me and others that, because what the state of Mississippi is doing is with charters and vouchers, the money doesn't just follow the child. The money doesn't go back to the public school. So let's say like you have a child and your child goes to charter school. The money that was for public school is going to follow your child to the charter school. But let's say you decide you don't like the charter school, you're going to put your child back in public school, that money doesn't come back. That's the way the Mississippi law is written.
So the problem with that is that, for me, I think that public education in America, like the way it was structured, was to trap Black Americans who, if you want to think about it, Rosenwald, those types of schools, that was a back in the day type of charter school, right? So it was privately funded, and we could see that our children, or the children at that time, were doing better than when they desegregated and they placed us into these public institutions, these public schools.
Well, hold on. Let me give you one caveat though. The Rosenthal schools came. Remember now, it's Black people who create public education during Reconstruction.
Right.
So the Rosenthal schools only come after Reconstruction is removed. That's why we needed the Rosenthal schools, is because white people didn't want public education as it was originally created, because public education as it was originally created was going to fund community schools. And so once you then remove Reconstruction, that's why the Rosenthal schools became a necessity. Was not because public schools were bad, was because public schools as we knew it in its inceptions had been demolished. So I'm not discounting what you're saying about.
Right. I just feel like a revitalization of that, because for me, I feel like public system is broken. Like we see that they've put us in a catch-22, because instead of it being equal with the amount of funding, what they do is they do it based off of property taxes. That depends on how much money you're going to get. So it's kind of like they trapped us here with this public education, and we need to be jumping just as much as they're jumping ship. We need to be jumping ship as well and creating our own schools, because
there you go. That's right.
But here's the caveat to that. We trapped ourselves as much because we engaged in the Black middle class flight. Mm-hmm. You have to understand, white flight never destroys a city or its tax base. Right. What destroys a city is the middle class flight. Right. So what really destroyed them, it wasn't that they trapped us in these, it was that we ourselves, those of us who could afford it, left. So it wasn't that the public school system as it was designed was bad. It was that the Black people who generated the taxes left, right? Yeah. The Black teachers, the Black engineers, the Black lawyers, the Black farmers, all of the Black people who were generating those taxes. And so the problem is we actually become beggars because those of us who had the tax base left our autonomy and went to white places where we no longer had a large enough population to influence the curriculum, if that makes
I,
sense.
yeah, I can say it like this because what I'm saying, I ain't gonna say I'm a product of black flight, but in a sense I kind of am because I could go in. I said myself I could go in between because I live with my uncle. Was was what's the term you'll say? I won't say well off, but he, what I'm saying, in the sense we made it, right? So, and then my aunt got a teaching job. So, like, basically, both of they incomes put us in a whole, put us in a whole nother tax bracket. And so, what happened was when I'm from Oak Cliff here in Dallas. So, I was going to school in uh Kimball High School in Oak Cliff, Southwest Dallas. And so we moved in 1993. We moved to Cedar Hill. Cedar Hill at the time was probably like 75% black. And I graduated and with it's probably I can say we probably had like maybe 80 to 90 black kids that graduated my graduating class. Uh I graduated in 97, get to Jackson in 97, and I came back home like 1 year in like 98, 99, and the whole population of Cedar Hill drastically changed. So now when I was coming back home, those middle class houses that you would see, and it was they it was guy Jean Jacques Taylor. Y'all know he used to cover Prime a lot. And he was a writer for the Dallas Morning News. And he was like where he went to school at, he went to Skyline, but he stayed around the neighborhood where Carter High School was. If we really think about it, Carter High School, Kimball, all these other places, Southwood Cliff, we all were middle class. And when I'm saying, like I tell people, when you talking about middle class, we talking about black people, white people that own their homes since the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So, but when we talking about that black flight, it's like once we got to our initial amount of how much we were gonna make, we decided to say, hey, we not staying in this neighborhood in Oak Cliff or this neighborhood in South Dallas. We moved south. We moved to Cedar Hill. We moved to Duncanville. We moved to DeSoto. We moved to places like Red Oak. And then we took our flights upward to the north, like Lake Highlands. Uh, we took it all the way up towards even Allen, Plano, uh, McKinney. Like we basically alienated our whole neighborhood to say, well, we want a place where our kids want to feel safe and it's good education. But what is good education if you as the parent is not going to be involved with your child's education? You put everything solely on the teacher, and the teacher is in the same predicament that you in because they have kids too.
So, the reason why I chose to talk about like us changing the school system that our kids are in is because there was a study done by Harvard, the Opportunity Insights, and it basically said that when Black boys are in certain types of environments, that it can negatively affect their outcome. So, Black boys do well in neighborhoods with good resources and low poverty rates and good race specific factors with less racial bias. So, being in the public school system, it's obviously has been failing many of our kids in the lower income areas. So the reason why I said privatize these things is because I'm looking at what are the refugees doing, or what are the immigrants doing, which when they looked at the the Supreme Court decision, and they were talking about the Black Americans, and they actually broke down who the Black Americans consisted of, or who the Black people consisted of. They were mostly immigrants. They weren't actual Black Americans. They were immigrants that titled themselves Black. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead. Continue.
Oh no, but I'm just saying, like, I'm trying to, and I was looking at, well, what are these immigrants doing? And then my son, he attends a private Christian school with one of these vouchers, and he is the only young Black man or Black boy in his class. But if I look at who are the other minorities, guess what? They're immigrants. They're Africans. They're Indians. There's not like Black American children at these types of schools. So what I'm saying is they're utilizing these avenues to make sure that their kids are getting this quality education.
Right. And everything you say is correct, but there are two things. So let's look at 1, 2, 3. Let's look at that 1, 2, third point, right? And here's the problem with that third point. Black boys do well in neighborhoods with good resources, right? Low poverty rates and good race specific. That's not just Black boys. All children do well in those neighborhoods. So that's so okay. So now, it's so all children do well in that. Now, here's a bit. There was a study that was done that it looked at the top 10% of all children from private schools and compared it to the top 10% of all children from public schools, right? Because there's this misnomer that an A at a public school is not the same as an A at a private school, right? So they said, well, let's look at this and let's see it. So they drew out all the variables and they looked at the top 10% private, top 10% public, and they tracked them essentially, tracked them through college, tracked them through. And did you know? And that study showed that the top 10% of the public school students had the exact same outcomes through college and employment as the top 10% of the private school. And do you know what the one and only one common denominator that both had? I'll let you take it again. What do you think the one and only one common denominator that the top 10% of the children from the public school had in common with the top 10% of the children from the private school? One and only one common denominator.
Was it two-parent home?
Well, it was involved parents, Mr. Ford. Wasn't even two parents. So where public schools begin to fail is that the other 90%, what happens is if the other 90% is where you get the drop off in failed parent participation and economics. In fact, after doing that, I did an informal study, and I went and I talked to 10 principals, elementary principals. And do you know what all 10, and I made sure to talk to them separately. Do you know what all 10 of those elementary principals told me?
The parents aren't participating?
But not just that, they told me something very specific, and they all admitted they didn't know why. Guess when Black parent participation tends to uniformly fall off or decrease?
When they're doing good?
No. At what point, and all these were 10 individual principals, at what point do you think that these 10 individual principals said that parenting in public schools tends to fall off? And I mind you, they didn't have an answer for it. It was third grade. They said that their parents all tend to do a really good job until right around or after the third grade. And what they don't know is they don't know why, and they don't know how to solve it. So from fourth grade until 12th grade, the two major problems with public schools is funding and full parent participation. I mean, and we go back to that 10%, because here's the other thing, and here's the other caveat that you have to throw into it with public schools. Because private schools get to select. Guess what else private schools don't? They don't have to deal that public schools have to. Special needs children.
Right.
And so that also impacts the score. So you have low parent participation, you have poor funding, and then you don't have enough funding. And I really not know about that because my mother was a special ed teacher. My mother had a specialist degree in education. She was one of the few people who could write curriculums for both special needs children and gifted children. Most teachers, if you ask Mr. Ford, most teachers can only write curriculums for either special needs or gifted. My mother was one of those rare who could. And so the other problem with public schools, so you have those three factors. So when we're discussing why charter schools and private schools work so well, it's not just tax-based. It's also how do we, between third grade and 12th grade, how do we increase parent participation? How do we increase funding? And and equally important, how do we increase resources and properly train teachers for special needs children? Those are the three areas that if you address, you tend to raise not just that top 10% that's already doing well, but that other 90% in public schools that's getting left behind because they don't have those three things that top 10% of public school students have.
The other thing that I don't like about public schools is that testing, like the rigorous testing that they do, when it's been shown that testing is not indicative of learning. Like, for instance, when comparing like the SAT and the ACT and how those scores shouldn't necessarily be utilized to say how well a Black child or a Black high school student should be able to do, it's a less accurate predictor of Black performance.
I agree with you, but the private schools and the charter schools also use them. So I agree with you. I agree that they are not accurate, but if you're going to embrace the private and charter school system, you're still
not the level of testing. Like, so at public school, they have like, we're doing testing week. Yeah. And they're basically preparing students for testing. Now, I don't know, maybe it's after kindergarten or something, but to my testament, even if it is a public school, these are things that I would want to see implemented, which is vigorous STEM programs. And that's not to say that public schools can't have them, but like you said, funding is an issue. So that's why I would say when we talk about charter schools keep people out, if it's a Black own charter school and your mission is to tackle gifted and special needs children, there's funding for that. They literally have a scholarship here in North Carolina where if your child has an IEP plan or a 504 plan, they can get up to $12,000 to $13,000, and it includes therapy, behavior therapy, any type of therapy that you need. You can utilize the funds to pay for it as well. So what I'm saying to you is that we have to make a change, because for us, the public school system, they kind of just left us there. And when I say left us there, I mean they're purposely underfunding even public schools are being underfunded, and advocating for funds from a system that's designed to make us fail is not working. What change can we do? Privatization is the answer.
Well, here's the problem, though. Here's the problem.
We keep going to court. Like North Carolina, we went to the Supreme Court twice regarding education. And twice the Supreme Court said, you guys are not doing enough for the amount of spending that they do per student. And it's not equal the level of education. Twice they have came and said, you guys need to do something about it. And they still haven't done anything about it. And it's still underfunded. And then with COVID happening, the amount of schools that are below average and failing it's abysmal.
But the problem is what you're doing is you're saying let's turn private schools and charter schools into public schools. That's what you're saying. And private and charter schools are not built or structured to become public schools. That is, private and charter schools are not built to accept everyone. So when you say let's take source funding, by definition, a private or charter school is designed only to accept so many people.
Right.
That's the whole point. And so if we work your plan, what you're really saying is let's turn private and charter schools into public schools by putting the majority of students over there. And what you're still going to have is some form of white flight. Whereas what you really want to say, so again, and I want to be clear, I'm not telling you not to fight for this. I want to be clear. What I'm saying is that just understand that when that by definition, what you're saying, charter and private schools are not designed to do. They are specifically designed to enhance at best 25% of the student population.
Right. So what is your answer for public education? Because they're not giving us any money for these schools unless the only thing that I can think of is going once again, like Brown versus Board of Education Part 2, and go to the Supreme Court again and show these findings of where you have unequal, and saying that you're only going to give a school a certain amount of money based off of property taxes is unconstitutional because you have unequal schooling for the students. That's the only thing that I can think of, is going to the Supreme Court again, if they pick up the case, and saying that giving public schools money based off of property taxes is unconstitutional because it's not equal.
But that's
that's the only thing that I can think of.
But that's what a lot of states don't do, though.
And the problem, and here's the problem, because my answer is unsexy and it upsets Black people. The problem that you have is the way public school is designed. It's designed to run off tax base. We deplete our own tax base.
Yep.
Right.
So you can never solve it. You can never solve it as long as Black people are depleting their own tax base.
Even so, Black people don't have the amount of wealth anyway as a white person. So by that narrative,
we may not have the amount of wealth as a white person, but in pockets we have, again, coming back, we have two. It was really $1.8 trillion.
Right.
We have in pockets. The problem is, even when we are in pockets, we relinquish the pockets.
Right.
Like, so so the problem is us in that we don't believe that we can do it. That's why we keep running from ourselves. And so let's say you have 100 Black people, let's say you have 100 Black people in Jackson. I'm just gonna number. But if 60 of those 100 Black people don't believe that the Black people can do it, those 60, I do HBCU band talk. I go to school board meeting directly. So I just wanted to say that. So if 6 of us then go to Rankin County or go to Madison or go to Clinton, what happens is then we say, okay, we depleted the tax base. That's the issue. That's not that's the issue. That every time we get in a position where we can control it, we deplete our own tax base. And that's the circular, right? The problem is there's no one simple, we have to understand that economics, politics, and education is a trifecta that must work together. You can't solve the economic issue without solving the educational issue. You can't solve the educational issue without solving the political issue. But we all want to say, well, if we solve this, then no. We have to solve the political. We have to vote. We have to support Black businesses. We have to use our tax base to fund our schools. If one of those is not done properly, all 3 of them will fall, if that makes sense. But I want to be clear. I want you to push for that because there are a lot of good ideas in what you have. And let me give you an example when I say I want you to push for that. When Clinton was first running for office, I was one of the few people supporting Jerry Brown out of California. And people were upset. They're like, Jerry Brown doesn't have a snowball's chance and you know what to win. Why are you supporting Jerry Brown? I supported Jerry Brown because I supported his education program. I knew he couldn't win. But I was going to support Jerry Brown as loudly as I could. And I wanted to be a thorn in the side of the Clinton people because I wanted the Jerry Brown education plan. And so we got enough support for Jerry Brown where Jerry Brown couldn't get elected president. But guess who Clinton used as his education reform?
Use his model for his education reform.
So what I'm telling you, Sister SheLovesThee, is don't let what I'm saying. I don't want you to think I'm telling you don't fight for this. Right. I just want you to understand that the hurdle the biggest hurdle you're going to have to jump is private and charter schools are only designed to take care of 25% of. That's right, Campbell. Jerry Brown was the education governor. And he did a lot of other stuff that was messed up, but that education plan. So fight for this because you never know what part of the thing that you're fighting for gets implemented when we reform the whole thing. Does that make sense?
Right.
Okay.
So I was going to say too, like here in Texas, we don't have a state tax. All of our money we get is from mainly it's going to come from property tax, it's going to come from tolls, it's going to come from coming from other avenues. So the way our school districts are funded, they are funded mostly basically so on property tax. So like we said with that here you go, it go right back again to that black flight. So let's just say if you was a middle class family that stayed, I'm gonna give you an example, that stayed in Sunnyside, Houston, Texas, or that's a hood right there. And if you was a middle class black family that stayed in that neighborhood, but you decide to take your talents to a Missouri city, which is in Fort Bend County, it's not in Harris County, or you decide to take your talents to like Spring, Texas, which is North Houston. That's I think that's Montgomery County. You are depleting your own school district of the money that is supposed to go to that school district. So in a case, that's in a sense, that's one of the reasons why Houston Independent School District is being ran by the state now instead of by the actual, you know what I'm saying, by the actual school district. So like when the state comes in and takes over, they gonna implement everything that, especially since we got a Republican governor, they gonna implement everything that their governor wants. And what the agency, the Texas Texas Education Agency, they are appointed by the governor. They're gonna try to implement everything that the governor is, because if they don't, you know what I'm saying, they're not gonna get reappointed back to that, to those positions and stuff like that. That's the reason why, years ago, almost, let's say 2006, so that's like 17 years ago, the Wilma Hutchins School District, they had so much corruption in that school district,
right,
that the state came in and said, "Nope, we're taking over." And guess what? When they took over, they shut the school district down, and they absorbed all those kids into the Dallas Independent School District.
Wow.
And they had not opened that school district back up since. So we talking about when you leave out of that neighborhood, that money, when you pay your taxes for your property, it leaves out of that neighborhood, you're basically the cause of why your neighborhood and why your schools are going to fail. because you don't have the money. You're not paying that property tax
Right.
to fund that school district. But you're gonna go to a school district like Allen, or you're gonna go to a school district like Plano or McKinney or something like that, you're funding them. You're funding them. They ain't got nothing to do with the inner city of Dallas. You're funding them. That's the reason why you can get a school like Allen that's like damn near 7,000 kids, and they can get the money with bonds and stuff like that, where they can fund the stadium like they have right there. I mean, I'm putting it as far as their sports, but they also can fund other things to the school too, like a IB Academy and stuff like that. So once you leave out of that school, once you leave out where you originally are from, and you go to those suburbs and stuff like that, it's over for where that school district that you went, that for the school district that you were helping out. And there's a lot of people here in Dallas that, like I said, they live in the inner city of Dallas, that have been in their houses, they own their houses, and they paid their taxes on their houses. And those people are like, look, I'm not leaving. But our generation is the ones that say, once we get up to, like I said, once we get up to a certain financial standard, we out the door. We'll go to, like I said, we'll go to Arlington, we'll go to Grand Prairie, we'll go to Irving, where I stay at right now. We'll go help out another city, but we won't help out the city where we originated from.
And also, what we don't do well, and I like to hear Mr. Ford's on if he's still on with us.
Yeah, I'm still on.
What we also don't do well, and I don't know if we don't do this because we think it's elitist, but one of the things that we used to that we just don't do well is, before we move, because Doc is right, but before we move, what we don't do is we don't seek out the people in our community who we know, who we think may have the same sensibilities that we have, to help push the local agendas. So that if I'm living in an area and I have a problem either with the school district or the roads or the votings or whatever, we don't do a good enough job of saying, okay, who are the black people around me that have the same political sensibilities that I have, same economic sensibilities that I have the same educational sensibilities that I have. We don't group up in that way for whatever reason. We'll group up socially. So we'll group with the black people that have the same music taste that we have. Group with the black people that have the same fashion taste that we have. But we don't take those other sensibilities and because that's where your neighborhood associations are, your homeowners associations, right? Not enough black people join homeowners association, and more importantly, not enough black people join renters associations. Because I got to tell y'all, if y'all renting, they coming for y'all first. So if you are a renter, you need to link up with other renters, because you have rights as a renter in a community. But for whatever reason, because that's really the if you go back to the Newt Gingrich Republican movement, Newt Gingrich was a history teacher that the Republican Party drafted to lead what became the contract with America, which was really the contract on Black America.
Right.
And they did it by taking over one school board at a time. They didn't take over businesses. They didn't take over. The Republican grassroots movement under Gingrich was one school board at a time. And as black people, we don't do that. We don't say, who are my neighbors? Let's get together and talk about what we want our street to be, what we want our neighborhood to be, what we want our school community to be. And I think, and so what happens is, when we don't do that, it goes then what Doc says, then we think, well, I got to move out to the suburbs because those are the people that have the same sensibilities that I have. Then we don't think that the black people living in our inner city communities have these same sensibilities. But I don't know why we don't do that.
And I'm going to say it like this. Just because you move to the suburbs don't mean that you're going to be on the same equal footing with the people that you stay there with, because those people been there for a minute. You just got there. Right. I never, to me, I feel like I never assimilated when I moved to Cedar Hill in high school, I never assimilated to that, to the standard of what Cedar Hill was all about. Now it's been 26 years since I left that school, and it's crazy that now you go there. This now the school is what, maybe 60% black, 30 some percent. No, it's probably like 50% Hispanic. No, black, 40 some percent Hispanic, and whatever else nationalities that are there. It is a drastic change from the time when I was there to what it is now. It's the same way. Like I said, it's the same. It'd be the same way about DeSoto. DeSoto, when I was in school, had a white mayor, a predominantly white city council, and a white school superintendent.
Mm-hmm.
It is predominantly black now. Predominantly black. Like it's like, but guess what? I'm not going to assimilate like that because I know where I come from, and I feel like once I get back to a point where I'm at, I'm gonna go back to where I came from, and try to build up my neighborhood where I stayed at, and that I know, and the people around me knew what it was. So that's my way of thinking.
And I'll end on this because I'm gonna jump off in a second. I appreciate you.
Yeah, we
I
probably
appreciate
are
this.
gonna
To something that Doc Cunningham said, and probably Mr. Ford can attest to this. I'm from Clarksville, Mississippi. SheLovesThee. And if everybody get a chance, you should. I want everybody to read a short story titled "Everyday Use" by Alice Walker. It's a short story titled "Everyday Use" by Alice Walker, because she discusses something in that short story that I saw firsthand. I was raised around people in Clarksville, Mississippi. Not everybody, but there was some people in Clarksville, Mississippi. They were so poor, sister, they couldn't even afford grass. But you know what these people did every morning? They got up and swept that dirt until it looked like carpet. That's the kind of self-pride. That poverty didn't mean we didn't have pride. And poverty didn't mean we didn't have sensibility. Because here's something that gets lost. The civil rights generation, the generation that was Freedom Summer, the average education of their parents was 4th grade. So think about that. The parents who raised the civil rights generation, their average education was 4th grade. So self-love has always been more important than education. And as Dick Gregory said, liberation is more important than education. Right. Because once you get your liberation, you can create whatever kind of education you want. Mm-hmm. And so we have to find a way to connect with the black people that got the same sensibilities that we got. And street by street, block by block, community by community, take back the school system, take back our neighborhoods, spend our money there with black people there, and do it that way. And that is the way we liberate ourselves. We take over the pockets where we are, where we got strong, high black population, take that over and make that our bastions of sovereignty. I'll shut up. Thank y'all once again, Doc and SheLovesThee. Mr. Ford, it's always a pleasure to talk to you and hear you. I'm gonna get off because I got a couple of deadlines and they're gonna be mad if I don't get these things in by midnight tonight.
Thank you for coming by, Mr. McGinnis.
Heck yeah, I appreciate it.
So it was a great discussion tonight. Mr. Ford, Doc, thank you so much for coming on. So overall, I think that I'm going to leave with this. I have a lot to think about, and I'll have to do some more research on public education, but I just don't see public education reform moving fast enough for our kids to be able to have an impact. If I have to do a lawsuit, a federal lawsuit, that's going to take 3 to 5 years. So I just have to do some research on what other avenues, whether it be tutoring schools, like creating after school vigorous tutoring programs for our young Black children, just always mindful, because my son is at that impressionable age, and he's going to be the leader of, in 13, 14 years, he needs to be in college. But there are children who are the same age as him, and they're not getting those opportunities, or they're not getting the teaching that they need, because we're understaffed with teachers. The education system is abysmal in a lot of public schools. So I have to do some more research on it, on what to do, because I'm a type of person where I want change to happen now, not 10 years from now. And so for me, it's more about, especially in North Carolina, where two times they went to the Supreme Court about education, and twice the North Carolina Supreme Court ruled and said that you guys are not doing enough for public education. You're not spending enough money per child, and you're not doing enough. And they still haven't done anything. Thank everybody for tuning in. If you would please like the stream. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. We'll be doing another one of these series real soon. And of course, as we leave out, we're going to be listening to Sonic Boom of the South.
I'm a good one.
Thank you, Doc and Mr. Ford.
Okay, have a good night here.
Anytime.